Oh my gosh, the dog is barking.
No, it's okay. Hi, Luna. Hey, everyone. I'm here with Gabrien Gregory. He has a political science major and he has a minor in military science from St. Mary's University. He is the candidate running for District 10. Welcome to the podcast, man. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. So I have a few questions up here, and just to get into it, we were talking a little bit, and just real quick,
Sure.
you're currently an AG officer, or that was what you were? You're something else now.
No, so I'm currently an AG officer.
Okay.
I'm a platoon leader at Fort Sam Houston in the reserve.
But just we're gonna start off with a softball here. What made you want to actually run? Like, why did you run for District 10? What was your calling?
Come January of last year, when the pandemic really hit our doorstep, right? It made me think about what my family was going through in 2008 during the last recession. My dad had just gotten out of the military, retired, thankfully, as a field grade officer. And long story short, if we didn't have his military retirement coming in, we wouldn't have made it. My family went through a bankruptcy. My family understands what it's like to go through economic hardship as a result of failure of decision making in government, and that goes from the local government on up to the top. And I remember as a kid watching the effects of that on my family, not only from a personal perspective and the impact it had on our family dynamic, but also just the struggle of getting by and what it was like, come Christmas time, struggling to get gifts, right? I watched that.
Yeah.
And I know what a lot of kids in District 10, but also, I mean, really everywhere in the United States are going through and what they're seeing and the impact that's going to have on them. It was the election of 2008 that really got me involved and thinking about, the reality that so many other people have it so much worse than my family did, especially for low income workers and people of color and LGBT members. And, the list goes on. When the recession hit, we realized a lot of those same scenarios that families went through in 2008 are going to happen again. And, we have seen families struggle through this pandemic. We've seen the failure of leadership. I just decided, look, I had no intent of running anytime soon. I have it in me. I'm not going to lie. I've been honest about that, but I didn't want to run naively, right? I didn't just want to jump right in. I've got a poli-sci degree. When the pandemic hit, it made me think this is going to be a reality for a lot of people out there. And we've seen that be true, throughout the pandemic. We've seen evictions rising. We've seen more people on the street. We've seen so much devastation across the nation, not to mention the hundreds of thousands of deaths and the impact that has on families. So it dawned on me, this is an opportunity to get involved and serve in a way that I believe we can bring a more progressive voice to District 10, the most historically conservative district in San Antonio. That's been represented by the same group of older white conservative men for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I think whether we win or lose, we have made inroads, and I'm really proud of the, pushing the agenda and being able to really show that people are tired of the status quo. They want a leader who, sure, they can disagree with on some things, but they know that they're going to listen to them as their neighbor, as their representative, and that they're going to take decision making seriously based on the input from the constituent and the experts, and actually follow things like science. And so, I just decided I want to jump in and have some good conversations, and that's exactly what we've done.
You said, like, and this is just common knowledge, District 10 has been notoriously conservative, both in its voting habits and in its councilmen over the years. So, like, I guess the question is, what challenges have you faced while running, if any, and what concerns you? What are your biggest concerns, right? What is on your mind when you're out campaigning, when you started this whole process, and even now as you currently campaign for the upcoming election, May 1st?
Yeah, well, I mean, first I'd say that the stereotypes about the Northeast side are just not true. Demographically speaking, the majority of the residents in District 10 are Hispanic, Black, and Asian American. And a lot of folks tend to think that the only people who reside in the Northeast side are older, whiter, conservative members of the community. And then that's just not true. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we push issues that are representative of all people. Because when we do that, the turnout is going to increase. More people are going to be, or the more people are going to know they have a voice at the table. And I hope that we've been able to accomplish that. In terms of challenges, yeah, I'm not going to lie to you. There's another opponent in this race who is more ideologically the same as mine. Mm-hmm. And he's been the hardest barrier in this process. What I'll say is that mm-hmm. I promise you, I am not in this for anything other than trying to make a change and make a positive difference. There are other people in this race who are kind of set in their ways from decades of professions that have, created more bias and really an idea that I can presume the answers to solve our problems rather than listen to people and listen to experts and go off of that to make decisions. That's been interesting. I made a decision, even though I'm a progressive, I'm a proud progressive. I would rather work with someone on an issue that I can work with them on mm-hmm. and get that accomplished if it's better at the end of the day for the majority of people. Mm-hmm. Senator Sanders is a good example of that. He's very clear about who he is and what he stands for, but he has a history of working with certain people that you wouldn't have thought he'd work with on issues that are more productive. When I'm out there listening to constituents in the district and I'm out talking to neighbors on the door, there are some, I'm not going to lie, who just immediately straight cut, are you a Democrat or Republican? And I'm honest with them. I said, look, I'm a registered Democrat, but I'm willing to listen to you and work together on the issues we can agree on. And some folks just throw it back in your face and say, no, leave. And others are kind of excited to have the conversation and figure out where we can agree. And I think there's been a polarization in District 10 for so long that this idea that this is a staunchly conservative district, period. Yeah. I don't agree with that. The majority of people that I have met mm-hmm. want someone who they can work with. They want to know there's an open door to the council office. And so I'd say that's been a barrier. But like I told you earlier, the majority of the time someone comes in and they really give me hope that the majority of people want to see, want to have a good conversation and get something done.
I've had so many conversations and District 10 is like one of the number one things that come up, right? District 10, District 8. But you see it and you just like, oh, that's the conservative area, right? And that's all it's really known for, especially because of its history of who the councilman was. And to see that change, or at least to welcome that change, is very refreshing, and it's a very different perspective. Speaking of your platform and speaking of, solutions and figuring out things that are going around, you've made a plan. Like, you are one of the few candidates I have seen who has like a detailed plan and has actively pushed that on multiple issues too. It's not like you're just running on one or a few issues or whatever. You're like, no, I want you to know I have a plan and I want you to know what that plan is. And I've looked into those plans. So a few of these questions that we're going to follow are going to be surrounding these types of plans. Now, the first one, we're going to just start off right off the bat, housing, right? There's a huge housing crisis. We talked about like people are getting evicted. People are finding it hard to find a job. Property taxes are going up. You have certain types of rent going up. It's getting harder to be approved for places, especially with, hard to find a job. So if you don't have the money, you can't get approved, and we'll get into like jobs later. But during this time, and because, we've also been in the middle of a pandemic, how do you plan on fixing the housing crisis, right? How do you plan on making homes more accessible?
Sure. Well, I want to tell you, it's really exciting that you have recognized that we have tried to push a plan for these issues, often. And as an organizer, you work on campaigns, you see candidates who you support fully, their heart's in the right place, but they don't really give more than rhetoric. Right. And I've really tried to push bullet points that I can push on the dais to actually make an impact. So it really does. I want you to know it means a lot that you've recognized that. In regard to housing, this is an example of an institutional issue, a systemic issue that's been a bubble ready to pop for years. And the pandemic and the last recession, have been wake up calls, and we continue to go down this road of not finding permanent solutions to this problem. And so we have created a plan in this campaign to attempt to keep families in their homes. We see more families, more people ending up on the street in District 10. In fact, we have seen a 200% increase of homeless residents in the past 4 years. If you look at the SAM Ministry point in time count, that's the fact. I know the councilman doesn't like to acknowledge that. He pushes back. But that's a fact.
Okay.
We need to recognize that more people have no other alternatives. If we let families end up on the street, it's only going to make all sides more frustrated about the problem of homelessness. Whether you look at a homeless individual negatively or positively, if you recognize, hey, this person may need some help because of an addiction, or because they need mental health care, or because they need a job, or maybe you're on the other side and you think that they're some sort of threat to humanity and you don't like the panhandling. Regardless, nobody wants to see people on the street. So I think it's more productive to enact housing first policies that we know have been effective in places like Atlanta and Denver, that actually curb the rate of increase of homelessness. So it keeps people in their home by providing direct relief to people facing eviction. If we can identify, hey, this family's they're going through it and they're gonna end up on the street if we don't do something about it. I want to make sure that we can stop that from happening. We can give them direct relief. We can pair them with the organizations out there that do work fairly well at getting people job opportunities. We have a new workforce development program. We ought to be thinking about how we can funnel folks like that into that program so that we can make sure they stay in their home. And, of course, we want to look at the homeless residents who are already out there. It sounds cliche, but it's true. Homelessness is not a crime. We should not be looking at homelessness as a crime. We can't victimize these people, and some folks do want to stay on the street. To some, that's their lifestyle, or to some, they want to stay there, and that's okay. They have a right in this country to do that and to be where they are. But if we don't invest in permanent funding solutions that are effective long term, the problem's going to get worse, and we're going to keep seeing these people struggle in various ways on the street, and that's not acceptable in our community, in my opinion. So I want to put forward several things. One, I want to invest in permanent housing solutions, housing first policies. The city of San Antonio, in my opinion, does not have a strong housing record right now. I mean, this is a city that doesn't even have a rent commission. So if you look at a district like District 10, where 47% of cost burdened residents are renters, it would probably be a fair thing to enact a rent commission so that they are represented and their problems and their issues are being heard and hopefully being addressed. What I mean by permanent housing solutions is, we need to strengthen the rehousing program for families. There are some organizations that do that already. What rehousing means is just that if someone ends up on the street, you rapidly try to get them back in a home. Okay. We should actively trying to get them back in a home, right? Not waiting and letting the problem get worse. We should be getting them back in a home, especially if they have kids. I do support the councilman on the issue of homestead exemption. I would like to see an increased homestead exemption in San Antonio. We are the lowest homestead percentage in the state of Texas, in contrast to major cities in Texas. We have a 0.1% homestead exemption compared to the 5, sometimes 10% homestead exemption rates in Dallas, Houston, Austin, etc. Yeah. So I want to increase that a little bit. Now, there's pushback there. I understand that has a dent impact in our general budget, but I do think that one, as I've out on the doors in District 10, as someone who wants to represent the people in District 10, they have told me, and the polls indicate they want to see an increased homestead exemption. So I think that it's the job of the representative to listen to the majority of the neighbors they want to represent and follow through. On that issue, though, it will bring property taxes down, even if you're getting a $40 difference in the year. I mean, to some people, that's a big difference. Yeah. And it's just something that we can do for homeowners, but it's not just current homeowners. I don't know if you're in the same boat. I'm in an apartment. My partner and I are in an apartment. And I have no clue when I'm going to get a house because it's not an attainable goal for many of us who are younger.
Yeah.
If we don't get these property tax rates lower, when you finally have the ability to get into a house, how do you know you're going to be able to stay in that house for longer than 3 years if you can't afford the increasing rates? So these are things we need to be thinking about long term. I would like to enhance partnerships with organizations and faith-based groups. You know, there are organizations that do a lot of really good work. And I think that sometimes people assume, well, if you're wanting to change everything by enacting housing first policies, you're just kind of presuming a lot of things about housing first policies. What are you going to do about these organizations? We're not getting rid of these organizations. We want to better collaborate with them in the plan to keep families in their home and provide solutions for homeless residents. Last point, for the homeless residents that are out there, I think it makes sense to consider long-term objectives like having a place for homeless residents to be, investing in a permanent housing solution by district for homeless residents who are on the street. A place that is obviously regulated to an extent, but doesn't have the sort of rules that and requirements that some of these faith-based organizations, you know, put on homeless residents. Haven for Hope's another example of that. And on the issue of Haven for Hope, I want to be clear. They do great work, but we shouldn't be living in a city with going on 2 million people where you've got one place centrally located that serves 48 people a night and has all these rules. If you talk to a homeless resident about this, half the time they don't want to go there because they don't want to be around other individuals with certain problems, or they don't want to have certain rules. Whether you have an addiction or a mental issue that needs to be addressed or lack of a job, you should not be forced away from a bed at night. I mean, in the United States of America, that doesn't make sense to me. And that's hurtful. I mean, frankly, I don't think that's looking out for one another, and that's certainly not the value that I want to see in District 10 or in San Antonio.
So I guess a few questions based off of what you just said. One, so for your housing first policy, where would the funding come from a lot of these, like, you know, immediate relief that we see, right? Where would the houses come? Like, where would the infrastructure come, right? Where would we house these people? Now, I know in Austin, what they did, especially during the freeze we had earlier, again, we're going to get into that, but especially during those times, they created vouchers, right? But these were temporary vouchers, right? These were for 1 night to 3 nights, right? Like, where are we going to find the infrastructure? Where's the housing going to come from? Where's the funding going to come from, right? And how will this affect the citizens as a whole?
Yeah, well, look, I think we can look at these cities like Denver, Atlanta, Austin. That what comes to mind when you think of permanent housing solution often is a big building with like an apartment or like a low-income housing complex. That's not what I'm referring to. We have examples in the United States and really around the world of projects. You've seen them. I mean, sometimes they're stable tent areas, sometimes they're facilities, right? For someone to be able to go, have their own space. It's protected and it's a clean environment that has some regulation. You know, we're not letting people go into a Hooverville, right? We're just pointing out that there's somewhere that they can be and that they can reside with some dignity. And by partnering with our mental health outreach teams, our workforce development teams, you know, they're out there, that would give them a place to better connect with people who are on the street, to figure out, you know, identify what their issue is, et cetera. Those projects are often under $10 million. So if you're thinking about it, Haven for Hope gets roughly $10 to $12 million annually for their support from the general budget. We would actually be saving money long term if we invested in locations for people to be, but we have to at the same time curb the rate of increase. Because if we keep increasing the homeless population, that facility long term is going to have to grow, or we're going to have to come up with more solutions to build on down the road, right? So there's plenty of places in District 10 where we could set up an environment for homeless residents to be that is welcoming to them and that would actually expand partnerships with organizations that do really good work. And that saves tax dollars long term.
So this is your solution to both homelessness and housing and stuff like that, right? So,
and I want to be clear that this is not, I'm not an expert on housing, right? And there are experts on housing that have worked in this field for many years. We had home base, come and brief the council about what we ought to be doing based on the facts and the data and the numbers. We should be listening to them. You know, this is one of the only council members in San Antonio in District 10 who doesn't want to invest in permanent solutions, even when organizations with experts on this issue are telling us, hey, here's the data, this is what we recommend, and it makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. So if we are not listening to experts, it's going to be very damaging. And if we're concerned about property taxes already and tax dollars in general, why are we not wanting to go the route of saving our tax dollars long term? That's the bullet point question, in my opinion.
So you want to basically open that communication up to these different organizations, if I'm understanding this correctly.
Exactly. Okay. I mean, think about it. The job of a representative is not to presume all the answers. I don't need to know all the answers. That's not the job. The job is to, at the end of the day, hopefully have evaluated a situation in your mm-hmm. community, hopefully based on facts and data and science and in recent times, medical science and medical experts, mm-hmm. To make the right choice and to make the right decisions and to vote in the direction that pairs with the facts that you just learned, right? It's not my job to know. I don't need a degree in X. I don't need to be a small business owner of X, right? I just need to be able to listen to those who are and represent them in my vote. And I think that if we had more representatives out there like that, who were willing to listen to those who are affected by the issues and those who work on the issues, we'd get a lot more done.
Furthering on housing, right? There is actually a housing proposition up for this election that's happening right now. Proposition A. Now, this proposition wants to include affordable housing in the language of the legislation that's already there to allow bonds to be used for affordable housing. Now, there are two concerns with this legislation, right? The people who propose it, right, they're saying, hey, bonds are used for public works. We should use these bonds for public housing to solve the housing crisis, right? Which would allow private companies to come in and basically build up a bunch of homes, right, at very low cost. It would encourage investors to invest, and it would ease a lot of financial burdens on us because they will be taking those on, and it'll create affordable housing, which will allow a lot of people to just walk in, get a house without having the hassle or the issues that we currently have right now. A lot of people, their concerns are with this, if this does pass, is will those private organizations or those companies, will they support affordable housing? Now, the proposition itself is just saying that it wants to include affordable housing in the language, right? It doesn't really do anything more or less than that. From what I've read, it just wants to include affordable housing within the lexicon of bonds. How do you feel about this? And for those concerns that I've addressed on both sides, right, like the people who support and the people who are against, what would you like to say about all of this?
Yeah, well, first, I support Proposition A. And the reason really for me is that, look, we're growing exponentially and we're going to continue growing. And it's not just here in San Antonio. We're among the fastest growing corridor between here and Austin in the United States. If we are not able to allow the council to make serious financial decisions about things like housing as we continue to grow in population, I think we're going to find ourselves in a worse situation long term. So for me, this issue is really more about the long-term impact. I've heard concerns. I hear them every day on the poll, at the poll, from particularly conservatives who, quote, don't want to give a blank check to council, right?
Yeah.
To do whatever they want. But what's interesting about that is that we rely on council to approve the budget for everything else as it is. And I think that if you're concerned about that, then it's even more a testament to the reality you need to get out and vote for people that you can trust to make good decisions about what's going to impact your community. So in my opinion, like I said, I'm willing to listen to residents in District 10. I support a homestead exemption. I'm going to push for that. I think that a lot of people, believe it or not, a lot of Republicans support this campaign because they know, oh, well, I'm kind of tired of this position not really being taken nonpartisanly. Yeah. And I'd rather have someone who's kind of more real with me and honest about where they stand than kind of just a rubber stamp for one group or the other. So with regard to Prop A, I just think that as we continue to grow, and in a city that here in San Antonio, I mean, 1 in 3 people live in poverty. Here in San Antonio, we are the most segregated, economically segregated city in the United States. Housing, to me, is probably the most important issue next to COVID relief on the agenda right now. And it's probably going to continue being the priority issue for some time. So if we're not making fundamental changes in documents like the city charter to allow us to expand on affordable housing, then I think we're going to run into an increase in homelessness. We're going to run into an increase of people struggling to get by, on top of the reality that a lot of people already are struggling to get by. I would rather see someone, I think this is originally stated from Councilwoman Sandoval, so I didn't make this up, but she said something along the lines of, I'd rather see someone in a home than on a sidewalk, right? I mean, some of these folks in District 10 are more concerned about their roads and their sidewalks. I think that's kind of a stuck in the 1950s kind of mindset. Sure, at one point that might have been the priority for certain people. We know that the West Side didn't have sidewalks. I mean, some places in the West Side still don't have sidewalks. So, I mean, it's ingrained in the poli-sci education, right? That the realities that so many have faced in the West Side and the South Side of San Antonio. The North Side has not really had that problem. I don't think we have a real drivability or walkability problem here.
No, I've been on you guys have so many you guys are pretty well maintained.
And I'll point it out, in a district that is absolutely more privileged in the decisions that have been made than the majority of the city. And I think that's important. It's important to have someone who acknowledges that. With that being said, a lot of folks are struggling to get by and stay in their homes, whether they're renters or homeowners. Mm-hmm. We need to be focused on that now. That's the priority. And if I'm the councilman, that's going to be my priority, not the million projects that need to get done to renovate a sidewalk in a very nice neighborhood to begin with.
Fair enough.
I'm just being real. I'm sorry if you disagree.
No, I welcome that. I welcome that. I always welcome that. Like I said, I always like it when, I always give credit to anyone who gets on here and it has full transparency, or at least tries to be as honest as possible, right? Because, some of the questions that we'll get into later, I personally consider them hardballs because I like to lean in, right? There's just things that are just very hard to touch on or very hard to talk about. Like, there's one question where I'm like, I don't even know if I should ask this, and I'm like, if I don't know if I should ask this, I should definitely ask this because normally when you're in a normal conversation, right, not an interview, you usually say, is this appropriate? If you have to think about it, it's probably not. But in an interview, in an interview, it is more the opposite, right? If you feel like this is more like if you shouldn't ask this question, you probably should, because that means you're looking for that answer and you need that answer, and it's the one area in general where you can actually ask that question and someone's not going to tell you you're a huge asshole. Anyways, so that is basically Proposition A in a nutshell. So going from housing, and we've talked a little bit about how jobs infect housing, right? Like how there's a lot of things we talked about, health and all that stuff like that are kind of interweaved. They all touch each other, right? They all affect each other. How are we gonna fix the current job crisis we're having right now, right? There are jobs everywhere. There are for hire signs. I've driven around San Antonio quite a lot. There's a lot of people hiring, but there's not a lot of people applying, right? We're having this whole entire thing happening during the pandemic, and in addition to a lot of that stuff, jobs are very hard to come by as well. Not like low-end jobs like fast food and bar industry and stuff like that, but rather just really good, well-paying jobs as well, right? I will tell you, for me, I am lucky enough to do the work that I do, but I have worked low-income jobs. I've worked at hotels, I've worked as bars, I've worked as a chef. I've worn so many different hats throughout my life. And I gotta tell you, sometimes it's hard. At the end of the day, you realize, wow, they really don't pay me for the amount of work that I do. I do not get paid well, So going into all of that and tying all of that in with like low or minimum wage jobs versus high end jobs, how are you going to address all of these issues, and how are you going to address the current job crisis we're going through right now?
Well, first I want to point out again that I don't have the answers to every problem, right? And I wish more candidates were able to acknowledge that. We have an economic task force that has assisted the mayor and the council through this pandemic. I'd like to meet with them if I'm elected to just get a glimpse at where we're at currently and what we're neglecting, what we need to improve going forward, and really get that expertise from people who know a little bit more about business than I do. I might not agree with everything they say. I mean, you still have to have a brain, right? But it's important to get the information, and take what you will from that. There's two kind of parts of this. You hit on low income jobs, and I'm really proud of the fact that I'm probably the only viable candidate in the District 10 race who knows what it's like to work a low income job. I've been similar to yourself. I've been a waiter. I waited for 5 years at Zio's Italian kitchen for $2.13 an hour, and tips and sometimes terrible people.
Yeah.
And it gives you a lot of insight to what people are going through. I've worked with people who have been in that job field forever. That's the only one that they're ever going to be in. And that's the job that they rely on to make ends meet for their family. And it's not enough. And some of this is a federal issue. And this is the first issue I'll point out, that as a councilman, I think it would be important to go up to Austin and advocate with our 2-hour congressional delegation here in Bexar County and across the state, changes that need to be made that impact the 186,000 residents of District 10. I might not be able to do a whole lot about the $2.13 an hour, but I should certainly advocate in my position as an elected representative for changes that are going to help my community. We don't see any of the council members. I hate to throw them all under the bus, but we don't see any of them going up to Austin very often to give their input at a hearing, right, about issues that are definitely going to affect their district. And that's really disheartening, in my opinion. It makes you wonder if people are there to just wait until there's a vote to vote on, or an issue to vote on, or if they're really being proactive to see a whole realm of changes. If I only served 2 years, I'd like to leave knowing, well, I advocated on this issue and this issue and this issue in the state and the federal government, and I got this done and this done, and that's okay. It was 1 or 2 things done, but I got it done. 1 in 7 workers in San Antonio are service industry workers, and they have been screwed during this pandemic, obviously because of the circumstances, but also because it took way too long for our leaders locally to do the right thing by giving them relief. The food and beverage relief program, for example, the first round of it that was proposed by Councilman Trevino sat on the council for months before our top leaders put it on the agenda, right? I'll say that, because I think it's okay to disagree. I would disagree with the mayor on that. I mean, we can't, some people can't afford to wait months when they have been without a job for at least 3 months on end, maybe longer, been shut down. Businesses have gone under. I mean, take a look at the number. I don't have the current numbers right this minute, but I know that they've continued to decline. The businesses that have gone down in light of the pandemic. I mean, it's devastating. And that affects not only, we think about it very, we think of workers, we think of the small business owner, but it also affects the vendors, and it affects all of the people in the ecosystem of the service industry who provide the food and the drinks to those businesses, and anyone else who works in the service industry as a whole. Those people rely on those jobs. So if you have businesses shutting down, those people are going to have an issue as well. Throughout the campaign, I've been very clear that, one, it was a failure. We needed the food and beverage relief program to be on the agenda for a vote immediately, and it should have been an emergency vote. We shouldn't have waited. I know I'm harping on that, but it's so important because if we waited too long, this is why we need proactive leaders who are listening to the service industry leaders in the community. I mean, I met with Jody Bailey Newman, Jarrett Pena, and others at the Friendly Spot. There were hundreds of people who are small business owners and restaurant owners and et cetera, hospitality workers. And they were all on board with the relief that they needed, and, simple things like providing CPS and SAWS discounts to them during the pandemic. So we were literally allowing our small businesses locally, our service industry, to struggle without giving them any relief. And then some people did get relief, and yes, some were able to get a $1,200 food and beverage license, but some didn't have that money to be able to get that license to stay open during that 3-month period. Some didn't meet the qualifications, so a lot of businesses went under because of that. We should have been looking, and we still have an opportunity to do some of these things. I know I'm speaking kind of past tense now because a lot of this has passed, and thankfully we are getting back on track for the most part. But I mean, we ought to do, in my opinion, we ought to enact a round 2 of the beverage relief program, the food and beverage relief program. Some businesses still really need that relief, and workers, if we could make sure that workers are getting direct relief so that we know that they're going to be okay and they can get back on their feet, and we, businesses don't have to keep cutting any more workers. I'm big on preventing the problems from getting worse. So let's do that. I'd like to look into decreasing the fees to third-party delivery services. We've seen cities, I can't remember where, one in California, where they decreased those fees. So if you're a small business and you're relying on DoorDash, Uber Eats, and other third-party services, you shouldn't have to pay, right? You shouldn't have to pay a lot to use those services, because at the end of the day, the priority is the workers that are relying on those tips and those the $2.13 an hour. And we need to recognize that that's not enough for a lot of people. And then lastly, I'd like to expand on hospitality industry grants. And I think we need to modernize our process. I can't tell you how many small business owners I've met with who don't know how to access grants or applications for grants or loans, and they don't know how to fill it out. I mean, it's not modernized. If you're a council member in a district, you should have a list of all of the small businesses in your district, and you should have an email for all of them. Like, that should be a priority, in my opinion, so that you have a way of communicating with them what opportunities are available. And then, in my opinion, we should be distributing those applications out to everyone so that it's available to everyone, and that we can have a better picture of who needs the help the most. That doesn't happen, to my knowledge, that doesn't happen anywhere. And it's an indicator, obviously, that the council waited so long, because it's clear that they did not listen. They were not actively meeting with service industry leaders to figure out what was going on. I mean, it's probably the biggest failure when it comes to jobs in light of the pandemic here in San Antonio. So if you're interested, as someone who's been a service industry worker, as someone who's a part-time barista right now and knows what it's like to work in that industry, who is one of those 1 in 7 workers in San Antonio, I have your back, and I'm going to fight for you. It was so cliche. No, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. That was funny. That was funny.
One thing I didn't cover is that from the beginning, I've been supportive of keeping bars open. A lot of bars have shut down in particular, and it didn't make sense to me that the Alamo Dome was allowed to be open and that restaurants were allowed to be open, but not bars, if you're following the same safety guidelines. So I was supportive of that, and I still am. What was it you hit on a minute ago? What was the first part of your question?
The first part of my question was where would the besides getting in touch with industry leaders, where would the funding from relief come from? Like, how would you, and do you have a contingency plan, right? Like, would you want to draft or propose a law or bill to make sure that if we ever are in a pandemic or any type of economic crisis, we have immediate relief instead of having to wait on people to vote on whether they should do immediate relief or not?
Remember, we had $100 million. We have $100 million in a relief fund, basically a stormy day fund, that we did not tap into. And it makes you wonder. And I know some conservatives have even mentioned this, and one person running for mayor in particular, and they asked, is this not crisis enough to tap into that fund? And I agree with that. It absolutely is. When we're looking at the fact at the beginning, 140,000 plus San Antonians are without work at the onset of the pandemic. When is there a more serious time than that to tap into funds? I don't know. So we do have a relief fund. With that being said, I do agree that we need a contingency plan. I get very specific about this because I am an Army officer, and we plan for everything in the military. Even if we know it's not going to happen, we have a plan for it. We need to take a serious, and I'd like to lead on this on council if elected. We need to take what's called an after-action review of the whole situation. We evaluate what were the areas we need to improve on and what were the areas we need to sustain. There are a lot of improvements that come to mind. One of them is the one you just mentioned. We should be able to tap into a relief fund immediately. The council needs to get on board with that and push that on the agenda, to get it on the agenda to provide relief out of that fund for a crisis, a literal global pandemic crisis that we have encountered. With that being said, we also can't wait months to give relief through other parts of the budget, like the food and beverage relief program that I mentioned. We should not be waiting that long. That's an improvement. If another situation occurs like the one we're facing now, it shouldn't take that long. We need to the council needs to get that on the agenda immediately. They need to, budge the mayor to get it on the agenda, to get an emergency vote on that issue, to give relief as soon as possible. You look at the relief that did come from the federal government, and cities like Dallas gave direct checks to workers. And they were giving like $1,000. It was basically a stimulus check for those workers that were hit the hardest. We didn't do that here in San Antonio. I asked why. I don't know why we would not give direct relief to workers who we know are out of work and are not going to get by, some of whom barely get by, if they get by, as it is, and under normal circumstances. So if you're losing the flow of traffic at your business and you're not, meeting your revenue goals, that's just terrible. I mean, we should have given direct relief. Really, any question you ask is going to go back to direct relief. If we have, I don't care, frankly, where the money's coming from. I don't care if it's from the general budget. I don't care if it's from federal government relief. I don't care if it's from state government relief or county relief. We should be giving direct relief, because if we don't give if we don't stimulate the worker and the residents, then they're not going to spend the money and keep people employed. That's why the stimulus check was so important from the federal government, right? And I'm sure when you got it, you probably felt the same way I did.
Yeah,
it helped us out a lot. I'll be honest with you, during the campaign, we almost lost our apartment. We had to get 2 jobs each early on in the campaign. So I understand what it's like to make ends meet. And I just think that if you have access to direct relief, you need to give that direct relief, because if you don't give it in enough time, people are going to end up on the street. People are going to file for eviction. People are going to move back in with their families. They have nowhere else to go. And that doesn't seem like rocket science to me. You hear people argue against that, and I'm like, what is your solution otherwise? And they don't have a solution otherwise. They would rather see people struggle or end up on the street or with their family than to give them the opportunity that they deserve. I want to hit briefly on the workforce development plan. Obviously, I'd be remiss not to. That's been a big issue locally. I have been a critic of one component of this, which is that what the voters voted on in November was not a complete plan.
The Ready to Work SA initiative.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't a complete plan. I mean, it was rushed through, and we still don't know some major points about how we're going to get people in the program, who specifically is going to get trained in what and where they're going to go afterward. If we don't have the answers to those questions, I don't know how we could even voted on it. But it was already voted on, rather. So the voters approved it. I want to make sure that we're evaluating what holes still need to be filled, so that we can get as many people signed up into training as possible. I mean, it's already been passed. It's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So, but I was against certain components of that, like, you shouldn't have to qualify for a Pell Grant, for example, to be a part of that program to get a job. I mean, we should be breaking down as many barriers to give people opportunities for work, not in placing more barriers on them, right? So a lot of folks who can't qualify for a Pell Grant are the exact folks who need to get a job. Right? And if you're placing these restrictions on people, they're never going to get a job. I don't particularly think this is the be-all end-all answer. I don't think that workforce development program is going to be the end-all be-all solution to jobs in San Antonio. I'd like to see a variety of bringing bigger businesses to San Antonio, but also at the same time prioritizing small business opportunity here locally. If you take a look at, you can hear the dog.
Yeah.
I'm going to shut the door.
No, it's okay.
Really, it's a 2-pronged approach. I'd like to see more small businesses come into District 10, and giving them more support is going to allow them to sustain workers and provide more opportunity locally. You see franchises going up left and right. There's obviously some development decisions that are being made and have been made by the previous 4 council members in this district. You know where the money's going, and it transfers over to neighborhood decisions. I have met people who are dealing with extremely loud noise from businesses that have been allowed to back the houses in a neighborhood. We're talking about like rock businesses, for example,
Okay.
like that have these major trucks. Lone Star Paving Company in particular was allowed to go directly behind a neighborhood. So I went to a house where we walked out to the backyard, and they're literally right behind their house, and they're making all this noise all day long. And originally they were making it at night, and finally it took months for the councilman to stop that from happening. But they shouldn't have been there in the first place. I don't think it's rocket science to presume that if you're a business that makes a lot of noise, you probably shouldn't be right behind a house, right? Or a housing area. So there are these big business development decisions that are being made and approved by and pushed by council members. Definitely the one here in District 10. My approach to that, and it relates to jobs a little bit, because we're talking about small businesses, bringing small businesses to District 10, welcoming them to District 10. We need to prioritize neighbors with regard to development decisions. So if we're going to consider bringing anything to District 10, whether it's a new neighborhood, a business, a franchise business, a small business, etc., then neighbors that are directly in that area of the district should be consulted before we approve that development, because they're going to be the ones dealing with the effects of that placement. So my approach to that is that I think that there should be a rule in place. And actually, Councilman Trevino did give us a start on this. I just don't think it's being enforced, and I think the councilman here doesn't care about it. We need to make sure that the neighbors that are directly in that area are at the table in this discussion before we approve any development, so that we can identify what the concerns are. Because at the end of the day, the people in the neighborhoods who live here are the people we should be listening to before we make any sort of developmental decision. Last point I want to hit on with regard, because I did mention big businesses, and I'm not the biggest fan of big business over small business. Like, I'd like to see more small businesses locally. James Dykeman and I were actually just talking a few weeks ago about the cultural impact of small businesses. You know, you go into one part of town, it's all franchises. You go to another part of town, it's really this culturally ingrained, beautiful environment that these small businesses really enrich the community, right? You go downtown, you have all these small businesses, and it's just a great place to be. It's a great place to hang out, but there's art, there's culture, there's community building. You don't get that if you keep developing these big businesses that don't really offer any sort of cultural impact. But also, I want to be aware that, you know, there are businesses out there like Amazon who need some serious work when it comes to union issues and pay issues. I don't want to bring all of those jobs all the time. I don't want to focus our attention. But at the same time, I will say this. In light of the pandemic, I have spoken to way too many people who are out of work or who need a job. And if there's an opportunity to give them a job, I want to bring them a job. So if there are decisions that can be made to bring jobs to District 10, I would more than likely be supportive of that, as long as we don't go overboard.
I hear you. That was a lot, because there were several different points and they all touch on kind of different issues. So I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning, and just to recap so we stay on track. You supported the opening of bars, and then furthering this, you want to, it sounds like, deal with zoning laws, right? So you want to make sure that, like, construction work or specifically noisy work doesn't end up in resident areas. And I know I haven't done the full research on every single candidate in District 10, but I know there's other candidates, mayoral candidates, and other district candidates who want to redraft the properties zoning laws versus the industrial zoning laws, right? They want to make sure housing and industrial, there's a balance, or they want to redraft it, right? And then in addition to all of that, dealing with bringing in big business while supporting local business. So going back to the beginning with the bar, there was, we saw that the bars reopened. I was actually working as a bartender during this time. And it was like the one and only job I can get, and then I bounced out. I will tell you personally, I was against it because we were still in the middle of a pandemic. And in fact, we saw a spike when bars opened up. We saw a huge spike in COVID cases and COVID deaths. In fact, Whiskey Tree, which is a bar, and it's not the only bar. I know the Thirsty Horse and several other bars that opened up all got shut down due to the fact that when they opened up, they got 13 cases of COVID, and 3 of those people died. So, do you say you still support that decision now? Finding this information, do you still support the decision that we should have opened bars, or do you feel as though like in my personal opinion, we should have given direct relief while keeping the bars closed until it was safe to open them up again.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of alternatives that would have been more beneficial early on. One of the ones you just mentioned, right? If we had adequately quickly provided direct relief, then that we would have avoided the conversation about opening. With the governor making a lot of irrational decisions that the city at several points in time had to balance and go off of, it made that very complicated, on top of an administration federally that just did not do anything productive during the pandemic at all. I mean, a complete failure of leadership in response to this pandemic. So we can't even begin to discuss this without pointing out that at the same time, vaccines at that point in the pandemic were slowly being distributed, slowly being available. They were slowly available to communities, if available at all. We are still encountering that. We are obviously a lot better, but even in the Northeast side, we have a councilman who didn't advocate for any sort of site on the Northeast side. We have several council members that didn't do that in their communities. Sorry, someone called. If ideally, right, and this is where you talked about the contingency plan, I'm the first one to bring up in the city, to my knowledge, having a pandemic playbook as we go forward that addresses the economic and health impacts that we encountered through this pandemic, so that we can open that book up and say, this is what we need to do better as an immediate response this time. Because we could have a pandemic a year from now, or 10 years from now, or 100 years from now, but at some point we're going to have one again, and we need to be prepared for it. And we need to understand the economic impact and the health impact, and probably several other impacts, environmental and other impacts. The reason I supported the bars being open was because, again, it didn't make sense to me that you're going to allow some to be open and others not to be. So a lot of workers that I spoke with, they personally, and I don't agree with this, I don't personally agree with their perspective on this, but they would rather have been at work because they needed to get by, and they weren't getting direct relief from the state or federal government or the city, because the food and beverage relief program wasn't even addressed.
At the very beginning of the pandemic. They're not getting relief.
Yeah. They chose, I want to stay and work and take the risk so that I can provide for my family.
Yeah.
Some didn't feel that way, and I respect that. At the end of the day, it goes back to that point about representation. The reality is that some people would rather take the risk. And who am I to tell them, if I were to be an elected official, well, you don't get to go to work. We're going to keep you shut down. But at the same time, you can keep watching events like the rodeo and the Alamodome fight, and restaurants stay open. So I think that if you're a leader and you're going to make a decision, and this is one of the things I disagree with the mayor on, if you're going to make a decision, it needs to apply to everyone, or you don't make the decision. A lot of people were frustrated that they couldn't go to work, or that they were shut down, but others were allowed to stay open. Do you see what I mean? So that's what I came down to for me, that as long as the guidelines were being followed, bars are even more regulated than restaurants are. I mean, because of the alcohol aspect. But also, you're right, ideally, and I wish that myself and some others would have been in a position on council to really advocate for what we needed to do, because we would have prioritized direct relief so that people didn't have to be in person at work. We would have prioritized, advocacy around getting vaccines distributed and funded, and not so centrally located. And we want to put those in the areas where the rates are the highest. We've seen that. I mean, we can recognize, even as I'm running in District 10, we can recognize that areas of the South Side and West Side have been the hardest hit. And we should have had a site directly in those neighborhoods first. At least this is an argument, so that we get that under control. So yeah, I mean, it comes down to, you're right. I agree with you. If we had prioritized a bunch of other things first, but we didn't have that luxury. And at the same time, I will point out, in this district, we have a councilman who has supported keeping everything open from the beginning, doesn't endorse, barely endorses people getting vaccinated, is a little too comfortable with people not getting vaccinated based on conspiracy theories and a whole range of other.
He doesn't support the mask mandate and stuff like that, which is we'll get into when we talk about COVID, which is going to be
COVID, got hospitalized, and came out of it still supportive of the governor's decision to remove a mask mandate. I mean, that's just reckless.
Yeah. So I want to expand on this a little bit before we get into the other two topics that we were talking about prior. But so going into again the bar industry, stuff like that. So for those who don't know, there was a study done, right? They wanted to do contact tracing, right?
Yeah.
Where all of these how people where they were getting it, how they were getting it, and where these things happen. Anyone who's ever gotten tested for COVID or has just gone and got a test will know that they get a phone call or they talk to a medical official and they'll do something called contact tracing where they ask you where you've been, what you do, and they go and test and interview those places, right, to see where it came from, where was the source, and what course of action should be further done. So the reason while bars are regulated, and I've worked in shitty dive bars and I've worked in very nice hotel bars, right? And I'll say the stuff that goes down, man, the stuff that goes down. But minus all of that, they found that bars, restaurants, hotels, public events such as like the Alamo Dome, like you said, and stuff like that, amusement parks, and gyms and stuff like that. Things that had to do with a lot of touching and a lot of crowded areas. Right there's multiple factors, but they found that these places were the highest for COVID, mainly not because the regulations weren't there, but because, especially for a bar, it's hard for them to garner any type of profit. They actually would lose money opening, mainly because, especially for small bars that can only fit 50 to 140, they have to maintain that social distancing. So if you're only getting 5 people throughout the whole entire day, and each of them spend like $20 on drinks, right, through that whole entire day, you're getting maybe like $100, yet you have to foot $4,000 in electricity, water, running the business, the alcohol, and just keeping the lights open. Just I believe when I was the manager at Sparks, just for one day, keeping the doors open cost us about $3,000, right? Just to open the bar, right? That's not anything else, right? And that was just $3,000 a day, and so like that's why bars, when they do like they make their money and stuff like that, we would make a profit of like $5,000, so there was $2,000 in revenue that we had for opening that day. But if you have something that's like very minimal in that sense, you're only making like $500 to $1,000. Well, you're just out $2,000 now, and that's for a small bar, right? That was a dive bar I worked. Hotels and restaurants have the luxury of having other avenues of revenue, right? They can sell food and sell that. Hotels, they sell their rooms. And then the bars at those areas, I believe they were known contact bars in the restaurants and in the hotels, where when I was a hotel bartender, I would make a drink, I would go and give it to them, and I'd walk away safely, right? They were not allowed to approach the bar. And so, and I know some bars worked around that by saying, hey, we'll hire a hostess. Like bars that never had a host or whatever, they would hire a hostess and they would go be like, sit down and stuff like that. But yeah, I just want to be clear about that. So in this sense, like where, because I know there's a stark difference between now, where people are getting vaccinated and stuff like that, versus the beginning of the pandemic, where you had leadership kind of, it seems like choosing favorites, right? This should be open, this shouldn't be open, trying to appeal to certain bases based off of the citizens' concerns, complaints, and a lot of misinformation out there as well.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, like I said, what it comes down to, if we're speaking retrospectively about
like what you would have done or what you would have liked to have done.
If we would have prioritized direct relief, we would not have had to even have this part of the conversation. But we did not prioritize direct relief. We didn't see a whole lot of advocacy around direct relief. And it's honestly not completely the city's fault. That obviously, again, the state and national leaders,
state mandates and stuff like that,
were screwing up the entire process and not even communicating where they were at in the process. But at the same time, I do agree that there was definitely some giving into, some voices that wanted to just stay open. I would push back a little bit. I've seen both. I've seen studies locally that showed scenarios where people ended up getting impacted by COVID negatively, getting the virus, dying from the virus. That's absolutely true. There were some other instances, but it's not as relevant because it happened in other states where they were following the guidelines a lot more productively. They were encouraging a safer community, and they did so very quickly. We were not so fast to do that. I wrote an op-ed for the Rivard Report at the time, early last year, where I was saying we needed to push for more education about following these guidelines. I mean, let's face it, a lot of folks in San Antonio are used to having their family over a lot. They were interacting a lot with people. And I wanted to make sure that some people were advocating for the actions that some other cities were acting on. Like if you look at Houston, Mayor Turner got with some of the sports stars in Houston to go and immediately do ads on TV and radio. They had billboards up. It took us a long time to get any of that. We didn't have ads at the onset of the pandemic very quickly in Spanish and English, encouraging people to follow the facts and the guidelines.
Yeah.
And I think I personally think that retrospectively, that's a proof that we would want to include in the pandemic playbook going forward, because we cannot be reactive to these problems. We've got to be as proactive as we can be, especially during a crisis. If we know this virus is going to kill X amount of people, and a lot of people are going to get infected, and a lot of the beds at the hospital are going to be filled, and that's going to have so many different impacts, then we should have prevented people from getting the virus as early as possible. And I don't want to be too critical. I mean, this is obviously a serious situation. There's a million other things on the plates of our leaders. But my personal opinion, we were a little too late to react to the problem compared to other cities. I think over time we've done a pretty good job compared to the majority of major cities. I personally feel that. But yeah, I mean, like, long story short, I mean, I know I am usually someone who doesn't like to talk about the past as much as what we can do in the future. But it is such an important issue that I agree. I mean, if we had the direct relief we needed, if we had leaders at the top in the state and federal government that were actually being proactive and mass creating and mass distributing a vaccine that was accessible equitably to everyone, if we had direct relief coming out of the state and federal government, not a $600 stimulus check way too late, for example, sure, I think we would have dealt with things a lot differently.
So I guess, and this will be my last question, because again, this is a highlight, like, regardless of where you fall on all of this, wherever you sit on all of this, it's a highly complex issue, because you're dealing with humans, right? You're dealing with human fallacies. So while, there's a lot of things we would have done, we would have liked to seen done and stuff like that, seeing where a lot of this stuff falls and dealing with both your constituents and how you would have voted or the proactive actions you would have done, you're dealing with a lot of stuff. You're fighting misinformation, you're fighting policies that are already in place. You have to deal with other political officials in conversating and convincing them to adopt whatever plan or ideas that you're putting forward. So yes, this is a highly this is a highly both politicized and complex issue. And while the solution, I always say this, while the solutions always seem obvious and simple, the executions is always the hardest part about all of this. So I do appreciate that. I'm sorry to harp on this so much, but I know it is an issue on a lot of people's minds. And I guess the last question I will have when stating this is, if you were District Councilor 10, right, say we go through another pandemic next year. I know there's mutations of the virus that have actually entered Houston already and stuff like that. Say we were to go through a second pandemic, right? Would you do a full shutdown? Because we saw last year where we didn't have a full shutdown. They called it a full shutdown, but there were still restaurants open. Like we said, they picked and choose and all this stuff. Would you do a full shutdown, or would you do like the pick and choosing where you're like, okay, these places can stay open, but these places can't based on the research? Or would you just leave everything open, right? Would you advocate for everything being open, just as, the councilman, the current incumbent, is advocating for?
And has continued to advocate the entire time.
Yes, continued to advocate for the whole entire time. Yeah, he hasn't changed his opinion on it.
I don't care if people die. Let's just keep everything open. No, I don't agree with him on that. And I want to be clear that what I didn't touch on is the Metro Health experts locally, right? They told us to shut down.
Yeah, and full shutdown. They wanted everything completely.
Right. If the medical experts are telling you to do something, I think we need to follow that. I want to be very clear. We had Dr. Fauci at the top and other medical experts across the nation, across the world, telling everybody shut it down.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if the direct relief would have been a focal point of the administrations,
Mm-hmm.
We could have had a full shutdown and prioritized the right approach. You're right. We had a shutdown. It didn't last very long. The cases dropped a little bit, and then we opened up again. If we had gone through a full shutdown for the amount of time that medical experts were actually telling us to stay shut down,
Mm-hmm.
to get the pandemic under control in the way that it is now,
Mm-hmm.
with the lowest numbers yesterday that we've seen in San
Yeah,
Antonio
we've seen a
since
huge
the
decrease,
beginning.
especially with the vaccines, and we're getting more vaccines, which is
Right,
really good.
right.
It's becoming
Yeah,
easier and
hold off.
easier to get a vaccine every single day.
Yes, absolutely, and that's great. I would support whatever the medical experts are telling us. Yes, business leaders and neighbors are important, but this is the part about using the brain I mentioned earlier.
Mm.
We need to listen on an issue that affects lives. When people are dying in a crisis, we need to listen to the people who are going to prevent death, and it shouldn't be too difficult to make that choice between jobs and life, in my personal view. So I would like to see, I don't want to see this at all, actually, but should we encounter another pandemic quickly, or a situation where mutations are occurring and there's another sort of threat, whatever the mental health experts and the medical experts nationwide are advocating for elected officials to act on, we should follow. Period.
Candidates, they wanted to do rezoning laws, right? We have current zoning laws in place and stuff like that. Now, one of the things I will say when I went out and talked to people and stuff like that, zoning laws are a huge thing. There are like railroad like tracks that like just go in and keep neighbors up, shaking like their whole entire like house and stuff like that. I know. I live right next to a military base, and I live like, so the flights, like when you see one of those jet airplanes, stuff like that, my whole house physically shakes.
C-130 going over you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, it's just like, it's like, whoa, okay, yeah, right. That's like, just you know, you're like, okay, I'm gonna wait. All right, cool. All right, I can talk again. You know, it's one of those things, right? Dealing with that, would you like some other candidates? Because some candidates don't want to focus on the zoning laws and stuff like that versus industrial and public, right? And for those of you who don't know, the way zoning laws typically work is you'll have like an industrial. This will be construction. This will be infrastructure. This will be some type of physical labor and stuff like that. And then you have commercial zoning, right? This is like grocery stores. This is also housing. This is apartments. This is like restaurants and stuff like that. Those are for commercial uses, as opposed to something like a moving company or something like that, or some type of steel work, and so on and so forth. So with that context added, would you like to reshape zoning laws or create certain ordinances to prevent certain types of places being constructed in certain areas? For example, like you said, the Lone Star Company, prevent them from going inside neighborhoods or certain specific areas, but rather see that shift and create like a specific area for industrial? Or would you want to try and create a balance between the two? Some candidates have proposed that as well, trying to find a way to mesh both of them.
The simple answer here is yes, definitely. We need to take a look at the redraft opportunities. I mean, I don't. Again, give me any issue. I'm comfortable being vulnerable that I'm not an expert on. There are experts on zoning that have worked not only here in San Antonio but in other cities as well. That we would want to bring to the table and listen to them about what their opinions are. I don't have to agree with it. What I recognize is that, again, a lot of these development decisions are being made based on friends and benefits and big money and those sorts of things, and that are harmful to the residents, even if it is something as simple as having flights that go over your home. In District 10, that's a big issue. There are a lot of neighborhoods that are directly underneath the flight path from the airport. Mm-hmm. And we need to be considering what we could do to alleviate those concerns when it comes to windows and noise pollution and all sorts of things. So, but yes, the short answer is that yes. And in fact, there are some other candidates out there who have worked on issues of zoning a lot more than I have, because I haven't really, that's not my expertise, zoning, right? And so I'd be interested in working with council members who do have that knowledge, more directly in their communities, who can probably push. I don't think that just because we agree on something doesn't mean that everybody has to push for something and be the lead on that issue. There are other people I'm thinking of who are candidates right now, and some who are currently serving as council members, who are much more knowledgeable about that. Probably, I think one in particular has been pushing for that a little bit for a while.
Yeah, one's actually and I'll go over it like, hey, check out my video on all the candidates running, because that's gonna be out hopefully when this comes out. But it's a video basically going over all the mayor candidates, just doing the research on all of these candidates, stuff like that. There are a few people who come with that experience. There's a few people who want to change it, right? Not a lot of them have a full plan. I believe one of them does. They like I said, they want to create a balance, which is why I asked that question, because that's their solution. But I don't know if it's the right solution. I'm not an expert. I can only follow the research that I do. So that's why I can tell you
for sure is that it seems that there's not always a balance. It seems like there's not always a balance when you've got situations like the one I mentioned earlier, where you've got companies moving in the back of a neighborhood, causing problems, and that continues to happen. So that's why I'm supportive of redrafting the language, and kind of having a better idea of what our right and left limits are as a city when it comes to zoning and development.
The winter storm. All right, so this one took us, like, all of us by surprise. I've talked about this prior in another video I've done. You can check out that as well, right up here. But this affected everybody, right? It showed how fragile our infrastructure is, how fragile, like, we've like our city and our state as a whole has been really hit, like really hit. Like we've seen how fragile our economic system is, our health system is. Like this past year has shown a lot of flaws within the systems that we live in everyday life, that we thought, a lot of people thought were infallible. And other people obviously have been crying for this, and there's other people who have been advocating for being on the national grid. There's other people who say we should have our own private grid. We've seen how fragile our grids are. We've seen how fragile our healthcare system is. We've seen how fragile, like, our homes are, right? Our water system, CPS, how fragile, and how you could see the kind of sway of corruption come through these things, right? With CPS trying to issue a high interest rate on the electricity and water bill, with CPS and SAWS both doing that. There were a few candidates, both incumbents and both people running for running for councilmen, that took swift action almost immediately. Day one, they took immediate action. So I guess my question is, how did you respond to this crisis? And then what is something you want to do to prevent this from ever happening again, right? What contingency plan would you like to have in place so we never have to go through something like the winter storm that we all faced?
Yes. So this one has been an extremely in-depth conversation the past few weeks, and that's a good thing, because it's definitely something that needs to be. There are some definite changes that need to be addressed here. First of all, this goes back to what I said earlier about council members advocating to the state and federal governments. We have known for a while that ERCOT exists. Some of the council members have acted like they didn't know about it. I think that's crazy, because we knew about it. We knew that we weren't on a national grid, and we knew from 2011 that there was a situation that would be worse if it happened again, and it did, in regard to having a winter storm scenario, right, and the impact that would have on our power grid. We should be a part of the national grid. It's the right thing to do. It's what scientists tell you we should be, and especially in light of the 111 Texans that died as a result of this gross negligence, frankly, and this lack of acknowledging climate reality. We have known for decades now that these storms are going to occur. They're going to happen more frequently, and they're going to be stronger. I'm one of the, I think I might, well, there's one other candidate actually who's a climate reality leader who went through a training with the Climate Reality Project, which is Vice President Al Gore's organization that he founded when he started pushing the climate reality issues that we've
for
seen
like
him
climate change and global warming and all that other stuff.
right.
Yeah.
And so we've known, I mean, some of us have a little bit of knowledge. I'm not a climate scientist, but I have been through that training and have really researched the issue of climate as much as I can without a degree. In fact, if I could go back to college, I would have gotten a degree in environmental science, because I feel like, I'm a trained HR professional. I'm an expertise at that to some degree. I have an expertise on the military side of discussions. But I feel like I would have benefited from environmental science because it's something I'm very passionate about. It is absolutely the most important issue of our time, and it affects everyone, and every level of government should be taking as many actions as possible to turn this ship around in regard to climate change. So we need council members who advocate for climate reality and for changes that are directly impacting life and death.
Yeah.
This is another one of those examples. We have experts out there who tell us this is serious, this is going to kill people. We need to listen to them.
I mean, it's
so that
killing
we can
people already.
And it's been killing people. It's going to continue killing people. We're all being impacted by it. We're all slowly dying from different sorts of
environmental
impacts.
issues. Yeah.
Right. And especially when you look at environmental justice issues, where there are some instances here in San Antonio, and you look at things like the coal plant. I'm one of the few candidates who are strongly supportive of shutting that thing down.
Yeah.
Because one of the biggest polluters, not only here in San Antonio, but also in the entire state of Texas. The reason I'm talking about this is because you can't talk about the winter storm without acknowledging climate change. And it's all connected.
Yeah.
We continue to rely on these fossil fuels instead of investing in every opportunity we can in renewable energy that provides more jobs long term, that will save tax dollars long term. And that's really not a partisan issue. I mean, you look at the mayor of Georgetown, Texas, who's a strong Republican, was one of the first mayors in the country to commit to 100% renewable energy.
Yes.
Because he gets that this is better for jobs, better for the economy, better for our environment. It's the right thing to do, and it'll save lives if we all contribute to it. So with regard to ERCOT, though, specific to the storm response, like this is where I will say I probably am at an advantage compared to some other candidates because I'm in the military. We plan a certain kind of way in the military to prevent death and to make choices under extremely serious and intense situations, right? When you look at what happened and you recognize that city leaders spent several days to open up a warming center, to get via buses directly out to the community, to provide resources to the hardest hit residents, and knowing that everyone was impacted pretty much. I mean, 90% plus of residents were impacted by their power going out or their water not working. We should have had a plan in place already for elderly residents, for people with disabilities, for people who rely on electricity for their healthcare needs. I have met people on the doors, one person in particular who had to go to the hospital because they were going to die if they stayed at home. They didn't have access to the electricity. There's a few things that I would have I'd like to implement going forward. Haven for Hope, if we're going to continue investing in it, they should have we need to ensure they have a power generator for that vulnerable population. We should also be partnering with them to have a plan in place for our homeless population. I will say they do have a fairly decent one. When I was out there a few days before the storm, my campaign, I'm proud of this, we were out there giving blankets and food to homeless residents in District 10. You can take a look at social media. You'll see that we were out there. Which is why I think it's so interesting that we knew several days in advance how bad the storm was going to be, yet some of the council members and the one in District 10 act like
wow. So you're like, I predict something's going to happen. So you actually tried to little bit of...
No, I mean, we didn't predict. I mean, it's just science. We knew that there was a bad storm coming.
And so
several days in advance.
Wow.
We knew that some of the vulnerable population out there is going to need more resources than others. So we went out there and we gave blankets, we gave food.
Wow.
You didn't see that happening just about anywhere.
No, no.
And
Everyone responded. I believe a lot of response happened like day one. Like they saw the storm, and once the storm happened, everyone rushed out. I believe one of the candidates I was interviewing said one day his phone just blew up right out of nowhere. He didn't know what was going on, and when he found out what happened, he literally left. But you were like, I see that something's gonna happen. I see the Weather Channel and stuff like that, and
well, I'm not God or anything. I'm
no,
just,
no, no.
you know,
That's why I said Weather Channel. Like
this is what I mean by proactive leadership, because we live in a city that's approaching 2 million residents, and when something happens that could potentially cause harm, we need to be prepared.
Yeah,
we need to have a plan in place to look. I live next to the senior center in District 10. Is it power generated? Is it a location for people to go to aid their healthcare needs and to have food available and water available? No. Why not? We are in a district with 186,000 residents. When something bad happens, a lot of people are going to be affected, and some might die. And so my point here is that as we move forward, we need a playbook for another crisis to occur. And this crisis isn't that different from any of the other crises that can happen, whether it's weather related or some other disaster. The intent of getting out resources to people is pretty much the same.
It's universal.
It's universal. The fact that we didn't have a plan to directly locate who needed the resources the most and have that happening on day one, not day 3, but on day 1. I'm talking about the city officials as a whole, right? I'm talking about leadership. I know there were some other candidates doing some good things, but in the case of District 10, the councilman went out 3 days later for a photo op when the sun came out. And I know what it felt like because we were without power and water for 3 days. This one really gets me angry. I'm not gonna go down that hole right now because
it's okay.
It really gets me angry that our city was not prepared for that. We need to make sure we're prepared going into the future. We need to make sure that we're identifying. This is the very military mind of me, right? We need to identify locations that people can go to that are directly located in their community, that are power generated, and that have resources available immediately. Because if we don't, then some people might die, and it is that serious. We need to be advocating for the state to transition to a climate reality mindset, to get us on the national grid, to make sure our equipment is weatherized as it should have been. We need to make sure that CPS does not fall into the state purview, and that we can manage our city's power as we see fit as a municipality with 2 million people. They should not have had to rely on the state to do anything, in my opinion. Do you see what I'm saying? And then in short, because I know you're going to ask about SAWS and CPS, what I'll tell you is what I've told everyone. The citizens need to have more oversight of our utilities. We are the ones affected. We cannot continue to think it's acceptable. I'm not going to push for any action in particular here, but it's not acceptable when people continue getting pay increases and bonuses, and we're not even prepared to keep the power on for our residents. With that being said, I'll probably just await your questions about it because I don't want to go down too big of a hole with that. You probably have specific things in your mind about CPS.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, like, if you want to go down the hole, you're more than welcome to. I'm here just listening to everything, and then I feel I don't mean to make you feel like a piece of meat. I'm just like dissecting you, just being like, all right, so he's saying this, and he's saying this, and all right.
No, I love it. I love it.
But so I guess so. Because the question was you saw it coming, the CPS and the SAWS thing, because I know there's a lot of people who are asking, and this is more of a mayoral issue, but I know districts, city councilmen's have jurisdiction over this as well, right? Because of the board, because of the way it's ran and stuff like that. I know that the mayor has currently a seat on both SAWS and CPS. I know that there was a petition last year, and this is the question I was going to ask you, because you kind of addressed it, the whole SAWS and CPS, where you stand on whether the mayor should have insight or not, and transparency with that or not, right? Whether the pay increase and whether the rate increase on citizens who had electricity and water is deserved or not, right? But moreover, there was a petition last year for the releasement of public records, right? So they were asking for, and I believe it was spearheaded by Renette King, and it basically what they wanted to do is they wanted to open the records, right? They wanted the petition was for basically transparency and accountability on both CPS and SAWS. I know there were two things. Renette King was focusing on CPS, and then there was another organization that was working on SAWS. I wish I could remember their name, but I just don't right now.
As accountability.
Yeah, something like that.
With Renette King's organization, is that the one?
Well, one of them was Renette King, but I know they weren't one and the same, right? Renette King was running the CPS one, and then there was another one. There's another campaign for the SAWS. It was about the aquifer, and it was about the regulations that surrounded SAWS, right? These petitions were basically asking for the same thing, even though the campaigns were run separately. They were asking for the same thing. Basically, they wanted transparent records, right? So basically, they wanted to know what the budget was. They wanted to know what decisions they made, right, throughout the past 10 years, and they wanted to know where their funding and money is coming from, right? Why is there rate increases? How are you guys getting funded? Who are your backers? They basically just wanted I forgot what it's called, but it's a Freedom of Public Information Act, or Freedom of Public Records. Basically, it's a request that anyone can make unless there is certain laws or legislation, and we'll get into those laws and legislations that prevent that in a later question I have. But basically, it's asking, hey, we want to know the records. We want to know your transactions. We want to know your bills. We want to know all that stuff like that. And we want to know the decisions you guys made, because the decisions are not made public between SAWS and CPS. We don't know their decisions until they're finalized and approved, right? So that's what the petition was asking for. So I guess my two questions were, do you think that a mayor should be able to sit on the board and make decisions through that, or have a vote on the decisions that SAWS and CPS make? And two, how do you feel about that petition that was ran last year? Unfortunately, it did not succeed. It did not get enough signatures, so of course it's not on the ballot. But it was an initiative that was taken, and I'm wondering if you support an initiative like that, or if you have an initiative you would like to propose yourself. Maybe you had issues with the first petition.
I can't remember if I personally signed it. If I didn't, I should have.
No, it's okay.
I may have signed it. I just don't have that info right in front of me. I think that I've been very supportive of SAWS accountability, and if you take a look, I'm trying to find it right now. Actually, I did fill out the SAWS Act Pack, which is the one.
That's what it. Yeah.
And it's endorsed by TOP, I believe, and other organizations, right?
Yes.
I was very clear, and you can take a look at it on that website. I said yes to everything except for the council legislative priorities issue. So I said, the only stipulation I have, the SAWS board does exist partly for the purpose of making those types of decisions. Mm-hmm. The board should be entrusted to oversee those, in my opinion. But I want to be clear. The city council should provide much more oversight over SAWS. Mm-hmm. It's important to remember, as I mentioned, that the SAWS board is chosen and approved by the city council, which is elected by the people. I think the process is designed to work. We just perhaps have not had the right people who actually care as much about oversight and accountability. And you take a look at these issues, like you take a look at the pipeline and the lengths at which some officials were willing to go to get that rushed approval. Yeah. And the lack of oversight and the lack of community input on that issue is a testament to really where we're at in terms of oversight over SAWS. We should not be dealing with rushed decisions like that have severe environmental impacts, that have no accountability whatsoever by the community. I mean, that's not the purpose of the elected official. I personally think a lot of times it comes down to who's in the position as the elected official, because right now, I think the question folks need to ask themselves is, do we have elected officials who are willing to hold SAWS and other utility
CPS
entities accountable? Yeah. Right. And can we choose candidates who are running who are going to prioritize holding people accountable, no matter who they are. And making sure that if we have another proposal for any sort of project like the pipeline, that the community is the first to be heard, that residents are the first to be heard. And in a situation like that, it's not just San Antonio, there's other counties that include people that need to be heard. There should always be a check and balance to ensure that these entities are being held accountable. And if you take a look at the SAWS Act, I support just about everything that's included in that. There was one more thing: we should open an election. The question was, we believe the city's fight against SAWS petition has made a case for a stronger SAWS Accountability Act. Will you join us in a call to elect the SAWS board and to guarantee representation on the board for all ratepayers?
Yeah, that was for so the citizens can vote on the SAWS board and instead of
yeah. That one I did not agree with. And I'll give you my answer just for full transparency. And I hope we're on the same topic. I hope this is kind of
we are. This is still dealing with the petition of SAWS. And then CPS was asking for similar things. So I'm assuming cool. you say SAWS, but are you including? I just want to clarify. Do you include CPS in this as well?
Yes. Okay. And what I wrote on this answer, because I did say no to this one as well, actually, but I wrote, I'm hesitant of the ramifications of political and financial influence should we open an election. I'm concerned about who would be able to run based on position or class. Already seen some instances where people were selected based on positions of influence or class. The city council already appoints members of the board. In my opinion, there should be a clear and public conversation by the council during hearings for consideration of a new member of the board, and there should be an effort to ensure representation by ratepayers. However, I believe opening this up to an election would bring about politicization. A city council must provide more oversight to prevent rushed decisions made almost entirely by and of the interest of developers. It's past time to place residents first and elect council members who fight for accountability and oversight. So my overall political philosophy is that if you are electing the people to city council who support oversight and accountability, they're going to choose the right person. And I think that in that process, it should all be very transparent and public.
Yeah. So you're saying it should be transparent and public, but like at the same time, we're hiring someone to do a job. If we do that job for them, what's the point of us hiring them? It sounds like.
Yeah, I think that in my opinion, that we'd be throwing a wrench in a process that's designed to work. It's just not. We need to have a serious conversation about the gaps in oversight and accountability.
Speaking of green energy, this has been something that has been brought up quite a few times, and I don't know if City Council is going to have to face this again in the future, especially after everything with the grid. But nuclear energy, this was something that was proposed in 2009 and 2018. San Antonio was discussing, or at least City Council, the City Council was discussing whether they should adopt nuclear energy within the city, right? Whether we should have a plant and replace it with, we would have wind, solar, and nuclear and shut down coal manufacturing and so on and so forth. And so I don't know if you are going to end up, if you do win, voting on this or not, or if this will come up again or not. But just in case, for, contentious purposes, and so I could say I did it first. Yeah. Where do you stand on that? Where do you stand on nuclear energy, and where would you vote? Because I know there's a lot of candidates running for greener energy, but some candidates obviously still supporting oil and coal, and there's some candidates who support green energy but don't want nuclear energy. Where do you fall on this, and how would you vote if a nuclear manufacturer were to come and say, hey, you guys had a grid crisis, you guys had a winter storm, nuclear energy wouldn't have allowed that to happen? Where do you stand? And you disappeared once again.
First, I think I personally land on nuclear being a much better alternative to oil and gas. With that being said, my personal opinion, I would personally agree more so with those who are pushing for greener energy than nuclear. However, I'm also realistic that again, it makes sense to me to be considering nuclear and the benefits that brings over. I mean, as we're phasing out the coal and gas, right? So I think that my very off the cuff answer is that I would want to have more information specifically about what would be presented Should it be presented again on council? Because I think that is also a complex issue, and I want to oversee. I would want to have a better understanding of the details of that, the location of that, the impact of that. But at the end of the day, as I've mentioned before, I am a strong supporter of green energy. I want more wind and solar opportunity, renewable energy opportunity, more so under that that side of renewable energy.
That umbrella, yeah.
That umbrella of renewable energy. But I think there are a lot of benefits to nuclear energy. I mean, there definitely are. I mean, that's undeniable. But at the same time, again, I would want to really understand the impact that's going to have on San Antonio should it be presented.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if that was a very eloquent answer.
No, it was eloquent enough. I would say it was a solid, good answer, right? You want just more information on that and stuff like that.
I would want more information.
Because and I always ask this, like, for everyone who doesn't know, like, I don't ask that a candidate knows the absolute answer, but like, how would you? Because you say you would like to look at the information before you would like vote some yes or no. And I know this was something that has been brought up because nuclear energy is one of those things that comes up. It doesn't get a whole lot of attention, but
right.
Especially nowadays with everything just everywhere, there's a lot of stuff. For example, Proposition A, it was so hard to find information on that because it just wasn't the main focal point of this election. And so, like, when you see these types of little things, when I was looking up other candidates, I found that nuclear energy was something that came up in a lot of past elections. In the 2019 election, it was a conversation that was having. In the 2009 election, it was a conversation that was happening. So I'm assuming that because we just had a winter storm, and this is just a prediction, I could be totally wrong, but we will have to eventually come across that bridge again when nuclear energy comes around and says, definitely. Hey, you guys are going through this, and they propose it, and city council has to vote on it, because it is a city council issue. So I just want to get that out of the way since we're talking about winter storms, we're talking about CPS and SAWS, we're talking about alternative energy. I just want to make sure I address that before we move on to anything else.
Well, and if we're talking about ever attempting the goal of 100% renewable energy, I think nuclear is going to have to be a part of that discussion. So I want to be clear that again, I'm comfortable with being vulnerable to the fact that is not currently on the dais. If it were to be if more specifics were to be presented, I would want to just have a really better understanding of what those details are and the impacts.
I will say this. So moving from the crisis, moving from CPS, moving from all of this stuff like that, from one tragedy to another, we're going to talk about COVID. We've been talking about COVID because it's just been dominating, and I know we've been talking about it within housing, within this, with that, because just COVID has touched on everything, right? Like besides the winter storm, if the winter storm was the only thing we dealt with, we would just have there's just this one part of the system. But COVID has revealed so many different parts of the system, right? And since we're on utilities and we're on COVID, many candidates have been pushing making internet an essential utility, right? They see that internet is now something that we rely on a lot more than we realize. And it was a definite shocker for me. I didn't realize how much I relied on internet, especially for my work, for my job, both the job I do now and when I used to work at both the hotel and the bar. If the internet went out, if we had a rainstorm or something like that, we had to do everything by paper, right? Technology's down, right? We have no access to the server. We have to now do all of the budget, tax paperwork, all of that stuff by paper. We had to pull out calculators, and we had to, crunch numbers and do methods in ways of getting information, right? We had to, figure out, okay, they have a credit card. How are we going to charge this person? So unless, the internet got back up, you were back on the servers and they were still there, or they came back another time, you could, recharge that. But yeah, so you see, a lot of people are pushing for internet services to be an essential utility, just like water, gas, and electricity.
Yeah.
So where do you stand on that, and how do you plan on, because some people have already come up with ideas on how they would do that. How would you make internet an essential utility if you support it being an essential utility?
Yeah, so it definitely is an essential utility. And I think that this falls under another systemic issue that's come to light due to the pandemic. The digital divide.
Yeah.
We live in a city with a major digital divide. Even in District 10, according to 2016 and SA 2020 information, we still have a 17% digital divide in District 10. That's a pretty big number when you're looking at all the stereotypes of how affluent the district is to begin with, right? And the fact that we do have more access to things like internet than some other districts in the city do. And that the majority of households compared to other districts have internet access and have access to technologies that some don't. I support what Mark Vargas is pushing for in District 3. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he is wanting to make sure that every San Antonio park is a Wi-Fi hub. He's looking into other alternatives for other locations to have access to Wi-Fi, and he's had a good discussion about how bigger businesses that want to come to San Antonio, when we're considering places like Amazon and other businesses, what can they do to make sure that our residents in San Antonio have access to internet? What could they do to ensure that we can afford access for every resident, the resources that come with that? I like that. I think that's a good direction in the conversation. So yeah, simple answer is yes, it's definitely infrastructure. I'm happy to see that the federal government is pushing an infrastructure plan that includes internet and technology as
replacing all the wires with fiber wires and stuff like that to speed up our technological progress. Yeah,
modern infrastructure, absolutely. And I don't see a lot of candidates or elected officials talking about that. So I really appreciate that you did mention that. At the end of the day, that's an issue that I have not been able to discuss with any sort of expert in terms of how we can directly provide that resource to families that don't have it. That's a little tricky. I'm sure that if I were elected, I'd probably want to meet with our county and state officials, because I know it's been a discussion in the state legislature at some point, and I know that there are a couple of representatives locally who have a better understanding of how we could provide the internet access and resources to people living in the digital divide. So I'd want to. It's another one of those issues where I want to meet with folks. If you give me any issue, I want to meet with people affected, and I want to meet with the people who have a better understanding of this, and then again push for what is hopefully the right thing to do based on the information that's gathered.
So I guess then I would just want to add a little bit of context and see your response on this, because I've done a little bit of research on this, but more importantly, I've actually talked to a few experts on at least the infrastructure side, right? Not maybe so much the policy side and the political side of it, but from an infrastructure standpoint, from a person who actually works with servers and works with infrastructure and internet cables and stuff like that. They say it would probably be a very high cost and a very intensive project, because you have to bury the line, and you have to bury it so deep that no normal construction will snap the line, right? The fibers or whatnot. So I know from an infrastructure standpoint, it is very intensive as on the whole city, right? Because we are such a big city. I know that there will be a heavy cost burden, as well as a lot of heavy construction and infrastructure. It would be a whole, as they said it, right? It'd be a whole reimagining of how we look at our infrastructure, because we would have to dig up so many things. We'd have to plan out where the lines would go and stuff like that.
Right.
So, and in addition to that concern and that issue, right, just trying to find a solution of like, where will we lay these lines? How will they, what will the construction look like, and what type of burden will be on the city, and the financial cost. We also have to deal with companies, right? We have companies like AT&T, Verizon, Spectrum, Charter, so on and so forth, right? All these companies that provide internet services. And there's actually a city here in America that actually turned away all of the services, right? They made a play like they weren't allowed to be there anymore. Right. And they created their own infrastructure, their own internet service, and it actually ended up being better than the competitors, right? So yeah, it was a lot faster. This was because of certain types of limitations that the companies were putting on the bandwidth. And the town said they found an engineer. They built the internet, and they found out that their internet ended up being so much faster than any of the service providers that entered the city. So my question is, because some candidates are saying they want to work with the companies, I believe there's like only one or two that are saying they want to try and create their own private internet grid, like this one town did. I believe this town was either in Ohio or in Virginia. I'd have to actually I'd have to like really look at that to know the specific name. But so I guess my question would be, or what I would like to see your response to is, would you want to work with the service provider? Would you try to propose our own internet grid, like creating our own infrastructure? And then how do you feel about like the heavy like both infrastructure construction burden and the financial costs it would have on San Antonio?
Yeah,
if we were to make this an essential utility rather than what it is right now.
Right. Like I said, it should definitely be an essential utility. That much I know for sure.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in what you've just told me about the private internet grid opportunity. So I would want to look into that more and hear from people about what that looked like, that process looked like. That's interesting. My concern is what the financial burden would look like, who's paying for it, stuff like that. I think that's probably why folks like Mark do talk about bringing up a discussion with Google and Amazon and other big businesses that could probably help us finance that project in trade with a certain opportunity here in San Antonio, right? I'm open to both. I mean, at the end of the day, my goal is to get people more internet access. So I'm definitely, that excites me to look into both of those options, particularly the private internet grid opportunity. That's something I do not know about and would love more information about. And it'd be cool if we could get some people who are a part of any of those projects that have already been acted on in other parts of the country to see what that would look like here in San Antonio and what impacts it would have.
Okay. All right. That's good. I like that answer. That is very just like, yeah, let's just figure it out, because it is I wouldn't even know where to find a solution for that personally. Like I did a little bit of research, and I talked to one person who mainly deals with the infrastructure and server data. So like they were just saying like it's not a bad idea. It's just the cost and the amount of construction and infrastructure that would need to happen would be so intensive, and it would probably be the easier route would probably be going with the company. They said that like Google, like with Google Fiber and with the legislation that's passing, that'd be a more viable option than creating your own grid. COVID has been a huge part of this. You've already said how you would handle it when it affects jobs, stuff like that. You support a full shutdown as long as there's COVID relief, and so on and so forth. It sounds like you support science and medical science as far as the mask mandates go, as far as the way we should handle the virus, social distancing, and all that other stuff.
And encouraging people to get the vaccine. There were 2 points I didn't mention earlier, and I apologize for continuing on this, but we need to continue pushing for the vaccine, and we need to acknowledge that this is not over. This is going to continue probably for the rest of our lives, right? Like this is like the flu. We're going to need booster shots. We need to be as encouraging about getting the shot now so that people are getting on board with anything that comes out of this long term. We also need to be aware that some people are having medical they're having different effects on their body and that are long term. And what is it that we're going to be doing, not so much in the council purview, but more just generally, like speaking? Are we acknowledging that? Are we considering that we may need to do more for residents in our community long term as a result of the health impact on our residents?
So moving from that, so basically that was one of the aspects is what should we do for the future, right? What should we do moving forward? Because if you are elected, you are going to have to still deal with this, right? Like you said, we're not out of the waters yet. We're getting vaccines and we're getting our booster shots and stuff like that. But we are also seeing mutations. We're also seeing stuff like this, and we don't know when the next one could hit. It could hit next year. We can get a twofer, for all we know. So I guess what would your plan, like if elected and in council, like what is your plan to make sure we have this in place, right? Like, so we are able to manage and handle this. But two, we've also seen a very mental health crisis, right? And a lot of candidates have taken that and basically said, we really need to focus on our mental health, not just because of all the people who are coming out where it's now becoming more accepting to accept mental health as an issue, but just more so that we've seen what effects it can have on the community when drastic trauma or changes happen, right? Like we saw in the last election, like we saw in like with the lockdowns and all this other stuff. We see all these things and it takes a mental toll. So basically, what are your plans for this? Like, right? Like, what are your plans for both dealing with another pandemic and, in addition, dealing with the mental health that comes tagged along with it, as well as mental health in general?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, we need a pandemic playbook. Someone mentioned that I didn't even think about this, but if you remember that Parks and Rec episode where Leslie goes through that pandemic crisis, and they're like, there was a playbook in that. So it's interesting that no one's talking about having an actual playbook. And I mean a playbook that's actually compiled, that contains data, that contains specific after action reviews about what we did wrong, and then a section on, based on all of that, what we need to do immediately in light of those details. So I think that as soon as, if I'm elected on council, I'm going to be pushing for Metro Health and other partners to start drafting a playbook that is based on that information and based on their recommendations, what we need to do if it needs to, if a situation like that comes up again. I think that's really important, because that's really the most productive way that we can assess the situation that we just went through and have a better understanding of what to do. And that's so important, because if we elect, if it's not this next time, or if it's 50 years from now, it's going to be a completely new council. And if we don't have a playbook based on what happened last time, and of course some variables have changed, I'm sure we'll be more modernized, things will have developed differently, but the human aspect's always going to be the same. So I would say the playbook, you mentioned the full shutdown. And at the end of the day, again, we need to listen to the advice of medical experts. I will be the one promoting that expertise and following that expertise. With regard to mental health, you're absolutely right. I haven't posted this plan, I don't think, but I've talked about it a lot with people, that we need to absolutely invest in mental health locally. There is a part of my comprehensive veterans plan that includes the idea that if we invested in more mental health opportunity locally, more veterans would also be able to have access to that.
Yes.
So, and with that coupled promotion, right? If we're promoting the idea that it's okay to get help, that it's okay to acknowledge and recognize that, things are changing in your life and that you're not responding the way that you usually would have to certain instances, it's okay to go talk to someone. It's okay to get help. And my last point on mental health is that, and I'm sure you'll ask me about Prop B.
Eventually,
minimal.
We'll get into all of it, because that's a whole entire thing. But focusing on mental health.
Mental health. One of the plans I do have is to increase mental health investment and opportunity for police officers and firefighters, because I have spoken with them and they have told me that they don't have a whole lot of access to that. They have healthcare, but I'm talking about how can we look into ways that we can promote and invest in healthcare opportunities for those who have seen a lot of traumatic events and a lot of traumatic images, in a culture similar to the military that's thankfully changing in the military, but not so much from what I understand in law enforcement, that it's okay to get help. It's normal to get to have seen what you've seen and done what you've done, and then need to get help for it and to make sure that you're staying healthy. That is okay. And as a city, I think we need to prioritize that across the board, whether you're, in law enforcement or police, fire, or in the military, or just a resident of San Antonio. It is okay to get help, and we should have opportunities that we've invested in for you to have access to that help.
Yeah, I've talked to many police officers who have seen terrible things, both within their own department and just out in the world, that have made them either want to transfer or quit entirely, just because, it's you see some stuff, right? You just see some stuff, and but like working within the military, you hear stories, you see the trauma, you see some people just have full mental breakdowns for no reason other than the fact that they just got back from tour, right? You see people who really want to rush back to combat because that's feels like home for them, right? Like there was this person who worked for the Navy. He was a boiler engineer or something like that, right? He worked in the boiler rooms on the Navy ships. And he would constantly, get drunk and stuff like that, feel like he had no purpose. It was hard for him to find a job, and stuff like that. He would always have these emotional outbursts, right? And he would constantly say how he missed going out, how he missed being in Afghanistan, how he missed, just being on the battlefield, right? Because it was something that was just, and I assumed this, he never outright said this, but it's I inferred that I'm like, this person really feels like that battlefield was home. He doesn't feel either welcomed, or he doesn't feel like this world that he's come back to is familiar anymore, right? It's so much more different, and you hear that story so many different times. I have friends of mine in the military. I asked them, but you see this, right? Like I have friends of mine who have, mental disorders now because they've returned from the military after their 8 years, 10 years, 20 years of service. And, those effects are lasting, and the aid, especially here in our city, is lacking. It's the number one complaint I hear from veterans is that there is not enough aid. So going from the coronavirus, going from mental health, you have actually come out as the veterans candidate. You've made that your platform, right? Your slogan literally is, I want to make military USA more than just a tagline, right? It's time that it just stops becoming a phrase and starts becoming a reality. I took that from your page, but that is your tagline. So I guess my question...
I hope so, because one of my opponents really likes to take our message, so it wouldn't shock me if you took it from theirs.
But I guess my question is, what do you actually mean by that? Like, slogans are slogans. People just say, we can make change, we can do this, we can do that, right? Make America better, right? Make change, right? Like, slogans are slogans, right? Like, military USA, we got to make that more than just a tagline. We got to make it a reality, right? That's a slogan. But what do you mean by that? What do you mean by, I want to make military USA more than just a tagline, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, what are your plans to address the issues of the men and women who serve our country, right? We are a heavily militarized city, right? We are known as Military USA because we have Lackland, Fort Sam, we have Randolph, right? We have a lot of military here, right? Like, I think a majority of our civilians are either military or military adjacent. I know I am. My grandfather was in the military, and my family is military and police, right? I mean, hell, I ended up working for the military, and I was not expecting that. I guess my question is what are you going to do? What do you mean by Military USA is more than just a tagline, and what are you going to do for the men and women who serve?
Sure. Well, thank you for that. And I'm happy to see that you view me as the veteran candidate.
You literally are.
I take that.
That wasn't a view. That was like, you've made that your tagline, and also you like doing the research. You are the veteran. You're not the only veteran candidate, but you're the one who's made that their platform, right? There's other mayor candidates. I take that. There's other people doing
with
that
pride, because I hope that some folks out there who are voting are looking up our information and seeing that as well. It's why I tell you that it's good that you see it that way. I hope others are as well, because that's really been the goal again on all these issues, to show that we are thinking about these solutions, that we can enact policies that are impactful positively. Yes, it's important I suppose that I am a service member, so I know what it's like to wear a uniform. I know what it's like to go through that process. And as an officer and a platoon leader, I'm responsible for 22 soldiers in my platoon. Um, and I know what that responsibility entails. Of course, the councilman in this district is also a veteran. He uh, he he was Air Force. We can't all be soldiers. It's okay. Um, I'm kidding. We're actually friendly. He frustrates me on this because I know he supports veterans, and I know his heart's in the right place when it comes to this issue. And I think that's the case for anyone who served. And oftentimes I look at it as an opportunity to actually be more productive in conversation and communication with each other. The councilman and I have a deep respect for one another because of the military, because we know what it's like to serve in that way, and what you're signing up to potentially do. And I give credit to anyone who has taken that pen and signed that paper, right? Because they could literally die from it. There's not many other professions. I won't go into police right now because that's an interesting perspective I have on that one. But particularly to the issues, the councilman in this district put up Military City USA signs. He was the one responsible for putting those signs up all across town, and that's great. We're promoting Military City USA, but it does nothing to actually invest in opportunities for education or professional workforce avenues or mental health care, as you mentioned. So my question from the beginning is, how can we actually do those things? How can we make veterans and their families' lives better by choosing San Antonio as home, and for those who have already considered San Antonio home? And so what I want to do in my first week, if I'm elected on council, is meet with our leaders of our veteran organizations locally. There's a bunch of them out there: Boot Campaign, Soldiers Angels, Blessed Angels, like other organizations that work with veterans in different ways, sometimes homelessness, sometimes jobs, sometimes healthcare. I want to meet with our state and county and national figures. I'd like to see if we could get one state rep, state senator, Congress member at the table. Even better if they sit on a veterans committee, like Senator Campbell, whom I have many disagreements with, but I think she chairs the veterans committee in the state Senate. I would want her at the table because I'm sure she has some insights on that issue. And if we could work together on that issue, I think that we could be productive. And then lastly, our military leaders locally. The military has representatives from these bases that work with the local government to make sure that things are running smoothly, and I want them at the table. And then lastly, the VA. We need someone from the federal medical side to be at the table. Once we're all at the table, the questions are, again, how are we investing in educational and professional and healthcare opportunities for veterans? What are the holes that we are not filling, and why? What are we neglecting? What do we need to improve? What do you need from us as a city, and vice versa? Those questions are not being asked. No one's actually meeting with the leaders and experts on issues. It's really sad, but this one in particular is important, because I think once we do that, once we expand those partnerships, we can better collaborate. So San Antonio doesn't have a lead figure for veterans issues anymore. We need one. I think that we need to work to expand the Alamo College veteran office that already currently exists, and make that the hub for city veteran services, because then you're connecting a lot of students, but you're also connecting a lot of military families, and those people that work there often have the expertise on benefits and where to direct veterans and their family members as it pertains to their issue. So we should be investing in more opportunities for that office to be impactful on veterans and their families. Well, I'd also, the last two are that I'd like to propose a professional workforce opportunity for currently serving enlisted Reserve and Guard members, across the branches. I have soldiers in my platoon who have been in the Army for 4+ years, are trained professionals in their field, and they're not competitive in the market. So I'd like, and I'm the first one to my knowledge to ever propose this, I'd like to meet with our big businesses locally like HEB, Frost, USAA, to open up a new specific opportunity for a program for enlisted soldiers and airmen and all the other branches in the Reserve and Guard locally to have job opportunity. because if they're not competitive right now, and I've talked to other friends in other units in San Antonio and in San Marcos and other places who have the same situation, they really rely on that check from the reserve and guard because their job outside of the military doesn't cover it. And I just think that's not acceptable. I do personally think that I think that while you should not have to join the military to have opportunity, and we know that that's a big reality right now.
That's a lot of reality, and for a lot
know,
of people, that reality has been shattered very quickly. And we'll get into
yeah,
that because
and
that's
it's
going to
not
be one of
fair.
the questions.
It's not fair. We should not live in a country where you have to join the military to get by. That's not okay. You have a right to join and not to join. I do, however, believe that there's something special about someone who's willing to put their life on the line, and basically give they are a blank check to the government to do what needs to be done, and that you don't see that kind of selflessness, in my opinion, anywhere else, and especially for those young people that make that decision. So, but the point is that we are Military City USA, right? And we should be investing in opportunities for veterans, and we should be welcoming more veterans to call San Antonio home because they're going to contribute to our community. Like literally, they're going to financially contribute. They're going to grow their families here. They're going to invest here. They're going to make businesses here. They're going to join businesses and be able to offer their professional expertise for our businesses locally. Veterans get things done in a way that others don't, like just across the board, right? Because of the way that they're trained and because of the way that they are proficient.
They're very procedure heavy, right? And so I see what you're saying when you're like,
well, and not only that, but also I think there's just like a stereotype about the military because we don't really educate the community about what the military really is. On top of the fact that, yes, there have been some bad things when we talk about the military, and we see cases like Vanessa Guillen, and then that becomes the front line of our perception of the military. What I'd also want to be clear about is that, and those are tragic, and I don't want to get into that, but that's not the point. That those are tragic. I acknowledge that. That's wrong.
Those are issues that need fixing.
Yes, there are improvements in any profession, this being one of them, and some serious ones. But that a lot of the perception is that the military is all guns and glory and all that, right? We're talking about an entire community across the country in the military that is trained in different things. Like you mentioned earlier, you could be a cook, you could be trained in HR like I am, you could be trained in the medical field.
Yeah,
it's
computer
not
specialist, like
infantry.
And like there's like, so when I worked for the military, you get like there's a community, right? You still need teachers, right? Some military go in there, they become teachers because they have preschools, elementary schools, and sometimes even military high schools, right? There's different things, right? Mechanics, people who work on cars, aviation. So military is a lot more diverse than just guns and stuff like that. They do logistics, they do
community, and it is diverse, and that's important.
Healthcare.
Glad you mentioned that, because these folks, and not always, right, but the majority of people that serve that I know the value of working in a diverse profession. And so you're actually often you have an opportunity to hire people who are willing and accepting of working for the job and the mission rather than treating people differently because of their background, right? And they see the value in people because they know what it's like to need to have that person watch their back and vice versa, under extreme circumstances. So but I've gone completely off course, and I apologize. My last point here is that the homestead exemption. I'd like to ensure that veterans who qualify for a homestead exemption actually receive that information in their application. I've talked to a lot of veterans who don't realize they qualify or don't know how to qualify. I'd like to see an audit take place of the process so that we can make sure that people who serve are getting that benefit. And I also think that if you're a Purple Heart recipient, for example, you shouldn't have to wait. There shouldn't be restrictions for you to have some relief on your property taxes.
So, I guess my question is one of the biggest things I've heard is that the VA it's hard to get funding through there. Like, some people wait months and months, 6 months, 8 months, just to get their benefits, right? They find it hard to find a job, whether it's just finding a job for someone to accept someone like that, or if it's they go and work, but they get fired instantly because of their PTSD, their mental health, or so on and so forth, right? And so they lose that job, and now they don't have anywhere, so they don't have anywhere they can go, right? And finding places where they can get mental health help is even harder as well, because our medical, like especially with mental health, we don't have the greatest mental health system. So like, and it's even harder on vets because when they're trying to find those mental health systems, they get just shifted through the system. And then on top of all of that, they get no either their GI Bill or whatnot. And finding like a house that'll approve them and stuff like that is tough in and of itself. They like a lot, like for some people, that shock I was talking about, right? Where they came in, they said, oh, I'm from a poor family. I don't have a lot. I'm going to join the military so I can get my education, so I can get my opportunities, right? So I can get my GI Bill and I can, do these things, right? And they end up finding that either it is true, right, for some, but for others, it's a hard, and for, I would argue most, it's a hard reality that, wow, I did all of my service. I did my 10 years of service, right? My 20 years of service, and I come back and I can't even get my GI Bill, right? I can't even get a job. I can't even get a house. I can't, I got shot. I'm disabled in my leg, right? And IED blew me up, right? And so I become paralyzed, and now I'm in a wheelchair, and now I can't even find housing. I don't qualify for any of this other stuff, and I'm still waiting for that GI Bill that I've been waiting on for 9 months, and I've been at the VA every single day, and I've been on the phone for up to 8 hours waiting for them to respond to me, right? To just accept my call, let alone just have that conversation. And then, the paperwork and shifting out. So I guess my question would be, and you answered that, you wanted to surround yourself with experts and solve that. But do you have any type of legislation or any type of thing you would want to do while you get those experts around, right? Is there anything that you would want to see, any type of like laws you would want to like pass locally to make the process a little bit easier on these veterans and these men and women who have served?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, the homestead exemption issues are something that I think we could push through pretty quickly and accomplish. I'm a big believer that better is always good. As President Obama mentions, right? If you can do something that's going to positively impact people and you can accomplish it, get it done. I'd like to leave office, should I get elected, knowing that, hey, I got this done and this done and this done, and it impacted people positively. Mm-hmm. I don't need to wait to wrap up a bunch of things in one policy. I'd like to push for the homestead. I'd like to push for, investing in mental health care locally.
Yeah.
For real, for everyone. Because what I mean here is that if we invest in mental health care for everyone in San Antonio,
the veterans will benefit from that as well. It'll benefit everyone, including I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think that as we talk about those types of proposals to everyone, those who disagree with us on maybe expanding mental health care, if they know the impact that's going to have, once we've identified the impact that's going to have on veterans in the community, that's a selling point to that policy. Do you know what I mean by the opposition often? When we invest in really opportunity for everyone, that helps veterans as well. So
they're included within that group.
Yes, you mentioned that people join the military, they have all these benefits, their life is great, and then they get out and they're kind of screwed often. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. That's important to acknowledge, and that's why I think that if we're going to be Military City USA, we need to invest in opportunities for them to choose San Antonio as home and not have to struggle afterward, after their service.
So I guess my question is how can we give relief to our veterans, right? Like, I mean, it hurts to see my friends struggling. I hate when I struggle. I can only imagine like the feeling that seeing someone else suffer hurts. So like, how can we make that easy? Is there a way to do like a veterans fund, right? Like a relief fund, or to at least wait until they get their GI Bill? Is there a way to make getting the GI Bill quicker? I mean, they served. Obviously, they've served, right? Yeah. They like, I have my paperwork. I have my whole entire uniform and everything should be like proof enough. But like, they also have all the paperwork to back it, right? Their records and their military ID and so on and so forth. So my question is how can we make that easily accessible, or at least less of a burden, right? Like both emotionally taxing, and financially taxing and just time taxing. How
Yeah.
is there a way we can make that easier? And if it can't be done through city council, what can people do? I guess.
Yeah. I think that's why it's so important to have that initial meeting with the figureheads of the organizations, the VA, the military, and so on, because they are going to have a better understanding of what veterans locally are going through, what the gaps are. That question is probably the most complex you've asked this entire time in terms of how unique every service member situation might be.
Okay.
And some veterans, and I'm just being completely honest, some veterans complain about their benefits not getting to them because they don't qualify for those benefits. And so sometimes the frustration isn't so much that they're not getting benefits they deserve, but that they don't get those benefits to begin with, and they're complaining unproductively. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get
That's not always. No, I'm just pointing out that's one situation.
Yeah.
The majority of the time, it probably is the situation that there's some sort of lapse in the process, but that includes, I mean, that is strictly a military situation where HR professionals and people who deal with benefits are going to be working on that case.
Okay.
There's not a whole lot the council could do on that. But I think overall, as we're talking about general, like broad, what can we do for veterans? That's why I believe really fundamentally, and as you've talked, I've been thinking about this statement that if we make life easier for everyone, that makes the veteran's life easier as well. If we can enhance opportunities in any way, whether it's homestead, whether it's mental health care, whether it's connecting veterans to organizations that do good work they may be unaware of, making sure that they are using their benefits locally. So if you have education benefits, why are we as a city not promoting even more the opportunity for them to get that education here in San Antonio through schools here in San Antonio? There's so many issues on this particular subject, and there's so many unique situations to every veteran that's why it's so important to me to have those leaders at the table, because I'm going to be asking the question you just asked, because we have over 100,000, 150,000 plus veterans in San Antonio.
That's a huge chunk of our population.
When it's that big, I think there's certainly a case to be made that we should have an office that directly deals with those issues. And especially when we know more veterans are coming in, we have so many bases, veterans are here to stay for a few years, and then they're on somewhere else. So we've got so many coming in and out and staying that we really need to we need to have the staff to be able to direct them to organizations or to the services that they need.
Okay. So moving from that, right, and we're moving from military to gun laws. This is something I was actually surprised, because a lot of candidates choose not to touch on this subject. There's not a majority of the candidates across all districts, across the mayor and in general, don't even have this in their platform. They don't mention it. It's not even a thing. You have actually mentioned this, and this is sensible gun laws. It even says that you've advocated for sensible gun laws, right? So this is a this is a hot button issue. And it's an issue that actually city council can change. A lot of people don't realize that. But gun laws can change at the city level. It's mostly viewed as a federal or state thing, but no, you can have city laws surrounding guns. Currently, San Antonio does not require a background check to buy a gun. By any means, you don't need to have a background check. You don't need to, have any type of, you don't need to be looked into. You can literally show up to any gun show or any gun shop, buy a gun outright, and, you pay the dealer their price, and you're good. It's just like going to the grocery store to buy an apple. In addition, you are not required to register your guns either, right? You don't have to process them or anything like that unless it's for a conceal license, right? To have to carry and conceal your gun out in the public, right? Then you are required to get a license and a background check.
Right.
But to just have a gun, to own a gun, to wield a gun, you do not need a license. You don't need to get a background check. You do not need to register any of the guns. You can have as many guns as you want without having to register them. And any age can have a gun, right? You can have a gun as soon as you're born if you wanted to. There's no age limit. We've seen out in the streets, kids can have guns, like as young as 5 years old, as young as 4 years old. At least within the state of Texas and specifically within the city of San Antonio. In addition to all of this, but you do need to be 18 to buy one. But I guess my question is, giving all of the context to this, can you expand upon what you mean by sensible gun laws, right? And what are your plans to, what are your gun law plans, and what would you like to propose to people?
Yeah. Well, you hit on a lot of it, and I can tell you this, that if there's anyone in the gun lobby in San Antonio, I am not gonna be their friend because on day one, I will start drafting those changes that need to be made. Everything you just mentioned should absolutely not exist in the city of San Antonio, and we need to make sure that we're protecting our community and that we are educating our community about what sensible gun safety looks like, because it's not impeding on anyone's Second Amendment right. This is an epidemic in the United States. 40,000 plus people are victims of gun violence that are killed at the end of a gun in the United States every year. And it's heartbreaking. And as someone who thankfully has not deployed to a combat environment, but who has at minimum participated in many trainings, simulated trainings with firearms, with automatic rifles, and being in positions of responsibility to make decisions about how we're going to prevent life and death on the battlefield and protect our soldiers using assault weapons. I know what it's like to go through those scenarios, and it's made me think even deeper about these instances that continue to happen at the end of typically an AR-15. And I just really hope that we as a city are doing everything that we can do as we go forward to prevent that from happening here, from one of our own, as a result of not having sensible gun laws in place and sensible gun ordinances in place. With that being said, at the same time, it goes back to what I said earlier about being an advocate. As a city council member, you should definitely be an advocate for your constituents. You should be going up to Austin. Most recently, I was upset to know that nobody from the city council in San Antonio went up to Austin to advocate against the House Bill 1927, I believe. It is not the responsibility of our representatives and our neighbors alone to advocate for these reckless bills that are absolutely going to cause death in our communities. We have enough facts to back this up. I'm going to strongly stand with those. And if I were elected to council in District 10, I'd be up in Austin fighting against these harmful bills. I mean, that are going to be damaging to the constituents in District 10 and all of San Antonio. Furthermore, federal bills like closing the Charleston loophole and limits on high-powered magazine expenditures and red flag laws that need to be shut down. And all of these bills, and I'm actually very familiar with these because, and I think I'm the only one in this race who is a member of Moms Demand Action and has been an advocate with Moms Demand Action for several years, working with Lisa Epstein and Linda Magid and Becca De Felice when she was the leader in San Antonio to organize events. And I've spoken with the family members of gun violence here in San Antonio, and it's just heartbreaking to hear the stories, sometimes just the simplest events that happened that could have been avoided so simply. I mean, just by requiring a background check, or really just everything you just mentioned not being allowed to exist without restriction. I mean, and I'm at the point where I'm so fed up that I'll say just about whatever I want on this issue. I will fight that issue to death because it is impacting all of our communities. And that's another point. because oftentimes it's stereotyped as well, and you know this on the West Side, that the West Side, South Side, and East Side are the only ones that deal with this. That's not true, and that's not true anywhere in the United States. It doesn't matter whether, I mean, sure that obviously there are communities that are disproportionately affected by gun violence, and that's important to acknowledge, but literally every community in the United States of America is impacted by gun violence. Can you tell me one person that you know that hasn't been at least adjacently connected to someone who has lost a life or been a victim of gun violence? And even here in District 10, in the past 2 weeks, we've had two active shooting situations right around the corner from where we live. These teenagers got into a gunfight at a car wash. I mean, this is happening in every community in San Antonio. So we need, like, long story short, we need to do everything we can to prevent gun violence in San Antonio.
Yeah.
And I would absolutely be the common sense, gun safety, anti-gun violence candidate on council. And if I could leave council pushing at least one of those ordinances, I'd be very happy.
We have, and I'm gonna breeze through this. This is multiple questions, but it's all type of the same issue, right? Lots of citizens. 78% actually of citizens have been asking for accountability from the union and from the police department, specifically SAPD, but also Bexar County Jail, right? And it's overwhelming that, like, there's a lot of people who believe that the police should be accountable, but the course of action that should be taken is highly controversial amongst all those people. Now, this is many are asking for reform, different kinds of reform on every single spectrum of this. This is another one of those issues that has varying degrees, right? And is also something that can happen at the city level, but uniquely, there are ways citizens can actually do stuff as well. Unlike gun laws, which only happen at the city level, right? That it can only be made by city officials. This is something that has been advocated by a lot of people. Proposition B is now on the rise. It is one of the things that's currently on the ballot. This is the removal of Chapter 174, or also known as the Collective Bargaining Agreement, also known as the police contract. Voting for this would be wanting to change it to something called meet confer, which is open negotiations and an open contract, a non-enforceable one, but one that would allow the citizens of San Antonio to actually be able to be part of the negotiations that happen as far as accountability is concerned and as far as the city and unions go and negotiate how police are ran. What is your stance on these issues, and what do you plan to do on these issues is my question. I know that you are a huge supporter. Literally, your social media feed is advocate you saying that not only that they should vote for you, but also in addition they should vote yes on Prop B. You've made this part of your platform, and more recently you've made this a big, strong point of your platform. In addition to all of that, there are a lot of I saw that you also support something called Cite and Release, which I have done a video on. You can check right here. But I have done a whole video on two people that actually pushed and worked with iStands. They were actually the people that pushed for Cite and Release and actually negotiated with, I believe, and I just want to make sure I get his name right, it's John Gonzalez. It's Joe Gonzalez, yes. With DA Joe Gonzalez, who also pushed for Cite and Release as well. In 2018, which was when they was voted on and stuff like that, and is currently up for vote within city council, and is something you're probably going to have to deal with in the coming years. So Cite and Release is a huge issue, and I have a ton of questions going on that as well, and I just hammering these all out because we're getting short on time. The issues with Cite Release have led citizens to have many concerns, right? I want to know what your thoughts are in expanding Cite and Release. One of the biggest things are the inclusion of graffiti within the legislation. In addition, adding all major drugs, not just weak drugs or Class C drugs, which include like marijuana, Xanax and Ambien and stuff like that, but including things like cocaine, heroin and stuff like that, and so on and so forth, and property damage up to $600. In addition, they've also included a whole, like, other states like San Marcos have included all of these things. And in fact, San Marcos has made this a law instead of an ordinance, which Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio have only made it an ordinance. But San Marcos has made it an actual law. In addition to all of this, there is a 60-day limit on cite and release. So if someone goes through cite and release, they've argued that the limit is too short for enough time. It's only 2 months long. And the problem with that is it's the financial burden and the probation and everything like that has led people to actually get into higher arrest, right? 500 people have made their court dates and have done the things they need to do, but for a majority of them, upwards to 2,000 people, based on the San Antonio police report and the DA reports, the data, the raw data, right? That the reports they made through cite and release, 2,000 people have still, under cite and release, have gotten arrested and put in jail and have been convicted, all because either they didn't make their court dates, they didn't have financial payments, or they didn't have adequate ways to do their things. They missed appointments or something, they didn't make probation, and so on and so forth. So the 60-day limit has been another concern of cite and release. In addition to this, police officers still have discretion when going out, right? They don't have to issue a cite and release. They can still arrest the person on the spot, and there's no repercussion because it's an ordinance and not a law. So that means the police officers can choose whether they want to initiate cite and release or not. And this is another... Oh, sorry?
That shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
You're listing, so I'm going to try to target some answers when I can.
I know. I'm going as fast as I possibly can. And a lot of people have argued that this is only half measure. That is a bigger problem. In addition, it's under fire as the community, especially low-income communities, have argued that it robs the low-income community, and it's just another way to keep them in poverty while enriching and financing the police department. Even DA Joe Gonzalez has said the main benefit to cite and release that he supports is that it eases the burden of the police department. It is less financially taxing on both the police department and the government, and allows them to, gain financial beneficiaries. In addition to that, so I guess I know I talked about a lot of stuff. What are your thoughts on this, and what type of reform would you like to see? Because I would argue you support Prop B. If anyone wants to see videos on Prop B, they could check this out right here. But yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah, so first things first, yes, I am the only viable candidate in District 10 who is supporting Prop B. I've supported it from day one. It's the right thing to do. It's a civil rights issue. It's the most impactful civil rights issue on the ballot. If you're in San Antonio and you want to make your voice heard, this is a first step pertaining to police reform that will get us on a path toward whole range of other opportunities. Not only is 143 next, but are we going to have the right leaders in our city when it comes to the conversation around qualified immunity? Are we going to have leaders who support cite and release, an extensive cite and release? I agree. Long story short, everything you just mentioned, I agree with. We should have an extensive cite and release program that focuses more on preventing families from being separated and prevents lives from being ruined for especially low-level offenses, but probably even for higher-level offenses as it pertains to drugs. I mean, there's just I've always leaned on the side that, like, if you're not really going to stop someone from doing something like that in the first place, so don't continue to ruin their lives and their families' lives more than what the situation might already be doing. And it is a huge waste of dollars, and it's a huge waste of time that our police should be spending time dealing with other issues elsewhere. So I agree with that. Hope I covered that. Just broad stroke, I support it. I'm your cite and release guy, and I'm committed to SA stands that if I'm elected, I'm going to push for that within the first 100 days, because I think it is that important, and it has been detrimental on members of our community here in San Antonio that we do not have that law in place. With regard to Prop B, I'll just point this out. Look, I'm a platoon leader responsible for 22 soldiers, and if any one of them did something wrong, they would be held accountable very quickly. They'd go through a zero tolerance process. If any of these uh, soldiers did something that one of these officers did, um, they would be dealt with in at least, at minimum, an extremely disciplinary action manner. Like I'm talking loss of pay, loss of rank, things that actually impact their livelihood. And when you see these arbitrators under this contract have the ability to rehire officers who are unfit to serve, probably to begin with, superseding the chief of police's decision, is crazy to me. It's not how it works in the military. It should not work that way in the police. And furthermore, as we discussed long-term reforms and the what was it, the four items that were brought up as Prop B began to become a campaign, such as like shooting in a moving vehicle, other actions that police officers
The
would take
no-knock
legally.
warrants,
All of
forced
them.
chokeholds or prolonged chokeholds, that, and then the aggression towards like pulling over. Right, you can't just pull over for no reason.
And not having to report certain
Yeah, so that was another thing of cite and
encounters,
release
firearm
in the data.
discharges.
Yeah, they
It's
don't have
crazy.
to, like, if someone pulls you over, a police officer does not have to report how many people they pull over or they stop.
Right.
Right? They don't have to give any report or any data on that. They can stop you for any reason, harass you for any reason, and then walk away after harassing you for 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, and they do not have to report that. Right? They only have to report arrests or cite and release. And that was another criticism of that.
On those points early on, it was just baffling to me that the rules of engagement essentially for police officers are less restrictive here on the streets in San Antonio to our own citizens than if I were to deploy to Afghanistan in a combat environment. A soldier cannot open fire at someone unless they're fired upon. Yet a San Antonio police officer doesn't have that kind of restriction and that kind of training to be able to deal with those types of circumstances. We need to continue looking into training alternatives. The video of the young girl in Ohio, right, was the most recent example of a situation that may not have been racially motivated. But the point is that the officer more than likely did do what he was trained to do. We need to think about whether that's something that we want to choose to accept, that maybe there are training alternatives that aren't going to result in the loss of life. And I can tell you that I'm trained to deal with, to go about alternatives before opening fire on someone in the military. So I know that there are ways of doing so. I'd like to make sure that we're continuing to push for those types of reforms here in San Antonio, regardless of what happens, at the ballot box on May 1st in regard to Prop B. But I will, real briefly, I am your Prop B candidate. I mean, this is a civil rights issue. This is not a labor issue. And to equate teachers and musicians and electricians to a police officer who is an armed individual serving to protect, and this idea that they can just get off with harming people in the community or disrespecting people in the community and then getting rewarded for it in the end, and stripping the authority of our chief of police and having zero community oversight, that is not a system that I want to abide to in my community. And I think that the increased turnout is going to show that a lot of folks are paying attention. I could be wrong, but I think that, when I'm at the poll, I am meeting a lot of people who are supportive of Prop B, and I'm hoping that makes an impact. One more thing, I'm sorry, I do think that if certain higher level officials had endorsed candidates who also support Prop B, that would have been beneficial to the future of reforms, the future of the conversation around reform. But also I think it would have increased turnout for candidates, but also Prop B.
All right. Well,
just throwing that little 2 cents in there. Did that cover everything?
So it didn't cover. It covered Proposition B, which again, like you supported. Cite and release is the more contagious. Is like they're both very contentious, but yeah, because cite and release has the 60-day limit, which a lot of people say should be expanded. There's the debate of expanding cite and release, which is a city council decision, and they're still currently debating that as well. on whether they should include a lot of the stuff. Some people want to, like, some people say, well, they should be like San Marcos, where they include rehabilitation, right? So San Marcos has included rehabilitation within cite and release. So that way, if you go through cite and release, right, you also go through rehabilitation, whether it is for drugs, graffiti, and so on and so forth. So instead of going to jail, instead of getting punished, right, you go and you possibly work for the business, or you go for drug relief, or so on and so forth, right? They try to identify the issue and fix the issue, which none of the other cities do, right? San Marcos is the only one in that sense. Not even Austin does that. Dallas, Houston don't do that, and we definitely don't do that. We have we have it as a city ordinance, and then the other issue is that cops still have the choice, right? It's not a guarantee that you get cite and release. They could still racially profile, which the data shows that they have. And again, I made a whole video about that you could check out. So I know we don't have a lot of time. I know there's a lot of stuff. If you would just bear with me for one last question, because there's a lot, and I guarantee you I'm probably going to ask for another interview, because I'm losing my voice a little bit as well. I'm starting to realize. But if you could just bear with me and let me ask you one final question. Last year, we had a lot of protest over the summer, and even in September, we had the murder of decorated war vet, right? Damian Daniels, African-American decorated war vet, literally bled red, white, and blue. Got murdered at the hands of a police officer in response to a mental health crisis, right? He was having PTSD episodes, and he was having terrible flashbacks. He was known for this within the neighborhood, and the neighborhood knew that he would have these episodes sometimes, right? Well, he was having another one, and he, went outside and was throwing, the police officer reported him as acting aggressive and irrational. He was just having another mental health episode. The police were called, and he was shot dead on the spot as soon as the police officers showed up, and the person who called the police was shocked. They reported it, and it made national news. And this is as recent as last year in, I believe, September or October, this happened. So this is really recent as far as San Antonio death's concerned, and this sparked outrage within the community. Again, this was another sense of where a police officer acted like on a whim without realizing the issue. We lost a decorated war vet who served our country for, I believe, 30 plus years. And it was very unprecedented, and it sparked a lot of outrage. District 10 got a protest from Black Lives Matter organizations where they went out at Councilman Perry's house in response to the community's involvement in the murders of Charles Roundtree, Marquise Jones, Anthony Scott, and Norman Cooper by local police officers. They asked for a moment of silence, and Council Perryman refused to acknowledge that moment of silence, being on his phone and falling asleep and ignoring the whims of the local community. So they protested at his house. This got, again, on city news and stuff like that. There was very divisive, as the community of District 10 saw this as a disturbance, but some people in District 10 welcomed it, even housing some of the Black Lives Matter protesters, which shocked a lot of people. And even joining in on the protest, some of the neighbors actually came by and joined in the protest for Black Lives Matter. Now, this is a very divisive movement, phrase, and so on and so forth. So my question is, what is your stance on Black Lives Matter, the term Black Lives Matter? What is your stance on Black Lives Matter as a whole and its movement? And then what does the term Black Lives Matter mean to you at all? If you do,
yeah.
How would you define it?
Well, first things first, Black lives do matter. I would really like to see a councilman in District 10 who acknowledges that fact, and who is proud to state that, because of what we're acknowledging when we state that. I think that it's really disappointing, and it certainly motivated me to run when I watched his failed leadership on the dais during that particular uh, hearing. I mean, the he doesn't have to support every bit this that we do, right? But his refusal to raise his fist, his refusal to care, very openly, visibly, right? His lack of care that he presented, it was a failed leadership moment for, if not the entire district, then certainly the 10% of the district that is made up by Black residents in District 10, and the 40% on top of that Hispanic population in District 10. I mean, he blatantly disrespected an entire group of people of color in his own district about an issue that is obviously more, that obviously pertains more so to people of color, and particularly more so to Black residents, right, across the country. It's clear that he does not have a grasp of civil rights. He does not have a grasp of the history of how this nation was built on the backs of slaves. And I think that it would be a wake-up call for the district to have someone in place who's willing to stand on the right side of history, not only with Prop B, but who's absolutely willing to stand in solidarity and as an ally to the Black community and to all people of color. And I will say that it hasn't been talked about much, but I'm an openly bi candidate running, and it's interesting to me that you look at someone like Jalen on the east side, who has been ridiculed by some and attacked by some for being Black and gay, right, and married at that. I haven't had any instances, and it's really the first time I'll say that I have personally seen the intersectional is probably the wrong word in this context, but the sort of privilege that I have as a white male, even though I'm bi, because if I were Black and bi in District 10, I would probably be facing a lot more attacks than I have encountered, if that makes any sense. So just at the end of the day, we need to stand for all people, and we need to make sure that every opportunity to have an elected official who takes civil rights seriously and acknowledges that right now in this time where police reform is really, in my opinion, the most direct civil rights issue of this moment, we need to have someone who's on the right side of history.
Dang. All right. That's I mean, I'm gonna let you. Like I said, I'm losing my voice. But in addition to all of that, I know you have to go. I've taken up so much of your time. This interview has lasted way longer. I don't know what this is gonna turn out, but for those of you who don't know, this has been a 4-hour interview. I am going to rack my brain editing this interview, just seeing what like how long it's gonna be. My God, my like so much. But I enjoy this, and it just shows how many issues. Like I have this. This is why I want to always do follow-up interviews, right? Because like there's still so many conversations within each of the questions that we've had that I feel like we still need to address. I still want to ask, and I guarantee you, as this election goes on, as this campaign goes on, I'm going to want to interview you at least again. I wish you the best of luck. I really do hope you win. And you are. I thank you so much for being on here. Is there anywhere, where can they find you? What can they do to get a hold of you, or what can they do to support you?
Well, thank you for taking 4 hours of your time to ask a candidate a question. I mean, all these questions and have a conversation, because, as you know, there are some other opponents in this race, and I'm hoping that we can make a runoff to face Councilman Perry. We're seeing a lot of support at the polls, but regardless of the outcome, we've made inroads. I think I've made it clear with organizations like TOP and others that it's time to get activated in the Northeast side, and that representation is going to come out if we are present. And I'm not going anywhere. So I'm going to continue working. You can find out more about the campaign at votegregory.com or on social media. It's just at Gabrien Gregory. is the tag. That's GABRIEN GREGORY. And then I'm more than happy to give my number out to anyone who wants it as well. So if anyone contacts you, let them know. And in fact, I mean, seriously, it's on our lit. Every single person that gets a door hanger has my number on there. So I think it's important that we are electing people who are accessible to our residents.
Okay, for a second there, I was gonna say, does my channel just attract everyone to just yell their number on my, like literally the last candidate I interviewed and some of the organizers I've interviewed, they literally just surprised me where they're like, "Oh, here's my number." I'm like, "You just give out your number like that? We are on the internet, man!" Like, do you know how many people watch this video? Are you sure you want them all calling you right now?
Oh. No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. It means a lot.
Oh yeah, anytime. And I want to thank you guys for watching and interacting and stuff like that. Like I said, links in the description to check out where Gregory is at and how to support him will be down there, as well as links to the videos that we mentioned in this podcast or this video or this interview or what have you, whatever you want to call it. And hopefully I'll be able to have Gregory on again for a follow-up interview, because man, there's just a lot of stuff, and if he gets on the council seat, I'm gonna have so many questions. But you guys stay beautiful, be kind to one another, because this is all we got, and we just got to be able to at least bring some type of positivity and some type of community within all our lives, no matter where we are. Be amazing, and don't forget to be awesome, 100%. We will see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Oh,
that's fun. That's fun.
That was
all right.
That was great. I just wasn't expecting it to go this long. This was